Good evening and welcome to the Eclectic Radical. As always, I'm Chris Richards, your host, the Eclectic Radical. With me tonight are two people I'm very happy to have on the show. Zeynab, formerly of Brand New Congress, formerly of Movement for a People's Party, never of the Democratic Party. Let's get that on the record now. And former congressional candidate Jason Call, who is no longer of the Democratic Party.
No longer.
How are you guys doing?
Zeynab, go ahead.
Good. I'm doing great today. It's been a long day and a weird day, but a good day.
Yeah, it was nice to get the last couple of days. We've got a little bit of sun up here. Finally, for March, we hit a pretty big cold snap, right? Cold snap at the end of February, but it warmed right back up again. So things are good. Things are busy.
I know how that goes. I have between the day job and this and everything I do in order to do this. Yeah, it gets a little tiring sometimes. And I know Zaynab's tired. She's been doing lots of stuff with Status Quo that looks really good. I think you're muted.
Sorry, it mutes on me sometimes. Yeah, we've been covering what's been going on in East Palestine and, trying to keep up with what's going on in Cop City and other things. A lot going on. But the mainstream media aren't really covering what's really going on in East Palestine or talking to the people there. So, with all of that, it's just such a dang mess. Feel bad for them.
I feel bad for them, and I'm also scared of what's going to happen there in the aftermath. I mean, this is a red state, and I know how people can get about red states. And one of the things that I sort of see is I see not much happening at the federal level to help folks. I see the state, which is a very Republican state, taking credit for any help that people do get and blame the federal government for it not being more simply because of the way politics in Ohio work. And I see a real risk because of the government failing to act in any sort of timely way, of more people being radicalized towards what you can only call Nazism than the other way because of this, simply because of the possible failed response that we're going to see.
Well, and it was a failed response of the Democratic Party. I mean, this is the thing. The Democratic Party is in charge. That is your shit to solve. And Pete Buttigieg has been an absolute disaster as transportation secretary. Joe Biden refusing to go to East Palestine, I think, shows a level of callousness and indifference to what's going on there, which I think is, let me say, not great at the potential start of a second presidential campaign for him. I think there's going to be a lot of things that he's going to have to answer for. And I've been doing my best to keep up on this, and it is amazing to me how, despite the terrible response from the Biden administration, how absolutely magnificently awful the Republican administration in Ohio is. Mike DeWine is a goddamn cretin. He is.
Well, and
apparently they love him there.
What's terrifying?
They love who? Mike DeWine in Ohio?
Mike DeWine in Ohio.
No, they don't.
That's not what I'm hearing. I mean, maybe in East Palestine they've woken up to something, but in terms of him getting reelected as a governor,
so
go ahead.
Here's where I will break in on Zeynab's behalf here too. The fact that he is popular with the voting base in Ohio is not the same as being loved in Ohio. the
And it
voting
depends
base.
on the polls too, because oftentimes
Yes.
the polls go to landline phones still to this day. So a lot of
Yes.
them are off on favorability. But I've been spending a lot of time trying to, like, one of the things I've been doing, Jason, is trying to dispel myths about red states based on like PVIs and voting records in the state. One of the things I discovered the other day on Ballotpedia when I was looking at how many seats went uncontested was that in Kentucky, 58% of the seats went uncontested. 58%. So the state house is getting all of that because the Dems have completely abandoned it. You can basically say the same thing for the governorship in Ohio. You can say the same thing for like their state house went red because 47% of their seats went uncontested this time around.
Yeah.
A good journalism project for anyone who was interested in the numbers would be to try to find out how many seats were specifically uncontested in 2022 because of the Democrats successfully getting the Green Party off the ballot in Texas in 2020. And so there wasn't even a Green running against Republicans in some districts in Texas in 2022.
When I went out to Huntington, West Virginia, to canvass for Paula Jean and Hillary Turner.
Thank you, by the way.
We had a great time. We loved it out there. I mean, there were some really like scary right-wing people who we encountered, like really like the anti-abortion, like the religious anti-abortion crowd. I'm very nervous around those people. But in general, we loved West Virginia, but we were down in Mercer County, which is down in the south of West Virginia, and I was friends with the Mercer County Democrats chair. Got to know her while I was there, so I consider her a friend now. And she told me that the state party has completely abandoned Democrats. It's county parties doing what they can on an absolutely shoestring budget with minimal volunteers. That the West Virginia State Democratic Party is virtually non-existent in terms of trying to fight for anything in that state.
And who's responsible for that?
It's got to be the DNC, I would say.
No, that's the whole thing. Is there is a political boss in West Virginia.
Oh, it's Joe Manchin.
Yes.
Yeah, there you go.
And the new quote unquote progressive Democratic leadership is pretty much the same as the old leadership. I've had a guest who was deeply involved in West Virginia politics on the show to talk about that. But they're talking a great game about how they're gonna get rid of Joe Manchin. We'll see who they replace him with and what happens.
Yeah.
They've also all had a bunch of pictures taken with Joe Manchin that makes me skeptical they're really trying to get rid of him, but that's just me. Maybe that's what you do now in politics. That Democrats take pictures with the people they're planning to get rid of. Is that where we are?
I nobody took pictures with me, but I got rid of myself. So, you know, Zeynab, I would be curious to know more about Mike DeWine. And where you feel his political future is as a result of this. If it's not, you know, I know people from Ohio who have told me he's going to get reelected, but what do you think about that?
I have no idea.
No?
You know, I mean, I know the people in East Palestine, you know, in the surrounding areas are mad as hell. But, you know, I don't really know. I mean, I know that Columbus is extremely progressive. You know, Cleveland has extremely progressive centers. There's a lot of places that are, you know, farther left. I do know that the bulk of people in Ohio are independent, so it can swing from party to party or independent or whatever, you know. So it's hard to say. You know, I guess it depends on what other options they have on the ballot too. Do they have anyone else that's seriously running? Do they have anyone that's campaigning? Are they going to have voter turnout? Is there voter suppression and gerrymandering impacting, the gubernatorial race? So there's so many factors there that it's really hard to tell. But I do know one thing for certain, that, there is this idea of places like Ohio and flyover country that assumes that everyone in like rural areas are, a certain way, and that they support Republicans, that they're conservative, and that they're automatically going to vote. When a lot of times they don't. I mean, Ohio's had plenty of Democratic governors. I mean, just like Kentucky had Matt Bevin, and people are like, there's no way that a Democratic governor will be voted in. And I was like, we had one 8 years ago. What are you talking about? And then we got Brashear in instead of Bevin because Brashear was so bad. And so like, it's really hard to say. And we got a while before they have another, so DeWine can do all kinds of things between now and then. I would imagine that how he's handled, the way Ohio handled this, will continue to like pick at DeWine. We've already done 3 stories on DeWine. I mean, he lied to Louis DeAngelis, our reporter that was there on the ground in East Palestine, to his face. So, people are pretty mad about it. They were from Ohio.
Was that when he denied saying that he had not called the president back? I saw that. I think I saw that clip. Yeah.
So it's hard to tell, because when is it? Is it 2024 that they have?
2024.
So
Mike DeWine.
That's a long time. Because people's public opinion sways in a month sometimes.
Mike DeWine was elected in 2020 because John Bonner was running for president, and so could not. That's not his name. I can't remember. Kasich, John Kasich.
Oh, Kasich.
John Kasich was running for president and could not run for re-election as governor. Right. And I believe he had promised to only serve 2 terms or something like that on top of that, or they actually have term limits in Ohio, maybe. One of those things. It's a good thing I'm not a journalist. I can't always remember all the details about that. But he beat the guy who ran the Consumer Protection Bureau because Elizabeth Warren wasn't going to get past the Congress for confirmation. So he beat the quote unquote progressive candidate, but the quote unquote progressive candidate was not necessarily someone from outside the establishment.
Right. I don't remember the guy's name, but I do kind of remember that.
Richard Cordray.
That's right. Yeah, Cordray. Yeah. I wonder, and I hope that whoever is going to win elections, particularly in Ohio in the future, will do it based on a platform or a mission of holding corporations accountable for their malfeasance. There was just so much known criminality in the way railroads have run their operations. I pulled up this article. I was going to share this. This came out. Michael Sonato published this a few days ago. Leaked audio reveals U.S. rail workers were told to skip inspections as Ohio crash prompts scrutiny to industry. And this is what's going on.
Sonato, I wonder what happened to him. I haven't seen him in a while.
That's a Guardian article. Wow.
So
I don't know if he's writing for them full time.
He has been, I think, doing a lot of Guardian work, but that's good for him to be actually covering, this stuff in mainstream news.
But it's stunning that this PSR program that they have implemented over the last, I don't know how long, was it 10 years or something, that with the railroad workers are precision scheduling railroad, that the laborers in railroad have been howling about that this is killing all aspects of safety and maintenance. And I looked at the cuts. There was a GAO accountability study done on PSR, and it highlighted the breakdown of where cuts were made. And 40% of the staffing cuts were made to jobs that dealt with maintenance.
Yep. Fun fact. One of the things that was in the deal that the union wanted, and that the railroad workers were determined to keep striking until they got to actually go on strike if they didn't get until Biden made it go away was the fact that they wanted the railroads to stop giving away so much as in dividends to investors and put more money back into maintenance.
Yeah.
This was central to their demands in the contract negotiation. The media just went on about paid vacation days. Now, mind you,
Right.
I believe in their right to have the paid vacation days too. I'm not dismissing the importance of paid vacation. I am saying the fundamental safety aspects of their complaint were completely brushed aside in favor of they want vacation days.
Right. And do you know how many train derailments happen annually?
It's 1,000, isn't it?
1,700 last year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I know there was
4 a day.
I know there was one in Oregon the same week. There was one in the same week as the East Palestine.
In the Houston area. There was one in South Carolina.
There was one today.
There was another one today in Ohio, wasn't it? There was another one in Ohio today. Yeah.
There was one in Springfield.
It was,
you had someone write in
it was another Norfolk Southern. It was carrying the same chemicals, and it was just fortunate that according to all the reports, the cars carrying the chemicals weren't involved in the actual derailment part.
And the best Pete Buttigieg has done is to, in Robin Williams style, stop, or I'll say stop again. If you remember Robin Williams' 1986 Live at the Met classic performance, where he talked about English police officers without guns.
Yeah,
that's exactly what I thought about with Pete Buttigieg. Stop, or I'll say stop again.
And you know, the English police officers without guns still manage to be more brutal to the English working class than Pete Buttigieg can muster for the railroads.
Oh my goodness.
Well, you know, I cannot remember. Oh, man, I need Melissa Mays right now from Flint, because she told me there is a piece of legislation, and I have COVID brain, so I can't remember the name of it. But I do know that there's a piece of legislation that in at least 35 states, you cannot call an emergency. You can't ask for federal funds for an emergency if it is not a natural disaster. Now, the EPA can come in. That's why the federal government couldn't come in for Flint. That's why they can't do anything in. So some people don't know, and that does not let Biden and Buttigieg off the hook, because he's over all of this. So, and they stomped out the unions, which caused this in the first place. And then there's other workarounds of assistance that they can give federally. So this doesn't let them off the hook. But one of the things that makes me the most angry about what's happening is the fact that the EPA and DeWine, unlike Philadelphia, unlike Pennsylvania, that, you know, their state house is deposing the CEO of Norfolk Southern to come in and say, how the hell did this happen?
Yeah, I'll give Josh Shapiro. I'll give Josh Shapiro credit. He was up saying, hey, we need more. Why weren't some of these regulations reimposed that Trump canceled? Why didn't we bring them back?
And it's more than the governor, you know, who's doing that. It's the state house members.
But I'm specifically giving Shapiro credit for bringing that up, because I dislike Josh Shapiro immensely, but I have to give him credit.
The state house pushed him too, but it was good that he did. Yeah. You know? But
that's important
they had a town hall on Friday, I believe it was. The EPA came, Norfolk Southern came, other people came. And, you know, it's a really powerful town hall if you guys want to, you know, tune in, anybody wants to watch it, because a lot of the folks tell their stories. But what I kept hearing from the EPA the whole time when I was listening to it was they were like, we want you to feel safe. We want you to believe it's safe. So the whole thing was about fifis. And then we found out that they're going to be testing for dioxins. But the thing about dioxins and testing with those is that Norfolk Southern is asking, you know, that it be remediated so that they can figure out if the dioxins actually came from the crash or not. So they're still wanting to protect themselves with our tax dollars through the EPA, which is some BS. And why have they not, if they don't know if it's safe or not, Yeah, exactly. Why not just relocate everyone right now? And now they're relocating people from within an arbitrary mile, but that ain't nothing.
It's like, and why not? And maybe I'm being too simplistic and naive, but if you actually make sure it's safe, doesn't it not matter whether they believe it's safe or not? Because now they'll be safe.
Yeah, and they certainly will believe they are more likely to believe they are safe if they are actually safe.
That's true. Now, mind you, I'm going to go there because I saw this in the news today, and it cannot be passed up upon. Let's not forget that ever since the former and now late Pope Benedict the Umpteenth was still Cardinal Joey the Rat, the Catholic Church has been working very hard to cover up the fact that your priest is more likely to groom you than anybody in any marginalized community is. That your father is more likely to groom you than anybody in any marginalized community is. That if women want to be afraid of people committing crimes in the women's room, they should look at all the times men have just come into ladies' rooms and committed crimes. Not that I'm trying to scare people, but it's happened a lot more than trans people have committed crimes in ladies' rooms. Of course.
Yeah. Than women going into the women's room. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you see the video from Missouri about the things that can't be, where they're pulling all the stuff in the library and these books are banned?
Yes,
and they're it's kind of and also the don't say gay thing, right? Don't you shouldn't be talking about gender, and the bill was apparently so badly written that the woman who had introduced the bill didn't even know what the bill actually was saying.
Yeah, of course.
And was called out by one of her GOP colleagues who was really kind of disgusted with the whole thing. I mean, good for him. And really just made her look like a fool on the spot, saying, so we can't talk about Martha Washington because Martha Washington's identity was George Washington's wife. She has no other real historical significance.
It's true.
So we're talking about gender identity and gender relationships now.
She does have another historical significance.
Go ahead, tell me.
I don't care about it, but certain kinds of people care about it quite a lot. Martha Custis, the name of her first husband, had a famous descendant who many people in Virginia think is much more important than George Washington. Can you name him?
Well, Robert E. Lee?
Yes. Robert E. Lee married, not descendant, sorry, but Robert E. Lee married Martha Custis's granddaughter by her first husband. Yeah. So he married into the Washingtons as closely as anyone could marry into a family.
Interesting.
Because George Washington had no kids. Martha's kids by her first husband were his stepkids. It was the closest he came to fatherhood was his relationship with his stepkids. So Robert E. Lee, in a sort of extended sense, was George Washington's grandson-in-law.
Wow.
His oldest son was Custis Lee. So this is important to remember, is that Martha Custis is important to the Confederate mythology as the grandmother of Robert E. Lee's wife.
Well, I think what is more important to remember is it's a club and you're not part of it.
Yeah,
right.
This is also true because you see this. Mr. Custis was very high in Virginia affairs, and Martha Custis was not going to marry down as a widow. I mean, you look at you can see similar situations in our modern politics when John Hines died, and a few years later his widow marries John Kerry.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
Now, so I mean, nobody likes to go down. Nobody likes to marry down after having enjoyed a certain status.
Sure.
So you're going to see Lauren Bacall's second husband was Jason Robards after Humphrey Bogart died. So I don't know if how many people realize this, but Humphrey Bogart's son and Sam Robards are half brothers. They had the same mom. But that said, I mean, it is the sort of thing where people want to marry into the same circle that they already belong to.
Yep. It's why almost the entire European continent was essentially ruled by one extended family for hundreds of years.
My favorite picture ever is the picture of George,
the three brothers, right?
George the Fifth
and Kaiser.
Well, George. Well, but the Kaiser was also the Queen Victoria's grandson, and he was their cousin. But the Kaiser did not look like them. But if you've ever seen the picture, there's only one taken. But they were both together in St. Petersburg on the one.
You can tell them apart.
You can tell them apart because George is naturally short and chunky.
Got it.
And Nicholas is naturally tall and athletic. But their faces are the same face on a different body with a different amount of baby fat.
Yep. And there's the one picture that does have the Wilhelm in it. And he didn't look too far off. But if you were pretty close.
but I mean, I'm not saying that there wasn't a resemblance. I'm saying they were the identical cousins from the Patty Duke show. And he did not have that degree of resemblance to them.
Yeah. For sure. Funny. Yeah, big club.
Well, fun fact, and I did not know this until last month, the month before, but it's fascinating. It's true. I looked it up. Except for Martin Van Buren. Why Martin Van Buren is the one exception, I don't know. I would have thought it would have been Andrew Johnson, but apparently his birth was higher than rumors like to say. Even Abraham Lincoln. All the U.S. presidents, except for Martin Van Buren, were descended from King John of England.
Very interesting.
So literally, I hate to make it sound like the Round Table conspiracy is true, but literally, except for one, all our presidents have been members of the royal family, even if only distantly.
It's simple. It's generational wealth.
Yep.
It's generational wealth.
Yes.
It keeps going and going and going and going. And that's one of the things that those in power work so hard to do. And it's not as it's not as like New World Order. There's one person pulling the strings on everything. It's more like they don't have to do that because the systems are already in place. Like if someone even wanted to do that, they don't have to.
Everybody's still cousins. It's just a larger
itself. I mean, it's self-perpetuating.
Yeah, because, you go to even leftists do this. I watch leftists do this all the time. The people that we put at the heads of our organizations, more wealthy, look educated, have the, Ivy League college degrees. And like I was talking about the Rust Belt, flyover country in Appalachia, they don't ever put us at the heads. Never, ever. You got to be from New York or you got to be from one of the coastal cities or something to ever we're the worker bees, right?
I remember.
And then, they kind of maintain the power and the control. And then, okay, I'll give a great example. So a lot of people don't realize this. I'll talk about some of our podcasters we have out there right now.
Sure.
You love this, Chris. So we've got, a lot of people don't know Richard Medhurst. His parents were in the UN and they won the Pulitzer Prize. He's from the DC Beltway, is friends with Max Blumenthal. Max Blumenthal's dad, everyone knows about Max Blumenthal and who his dad is. Lee Camp. People don't realize that Lee Camp's mom is a federal judge in Bethesda, DC, so he's from that same circle. And then you have Aaron Mate. His dad was friends with all of their parents. His dad was a famous physician that like treated people in DC and wrote books. Like
his father is also the same sort of left-wing cultural figure as Cornel West.
Yes.
To a lesser degree.
Yes. And so like there's still gatekeeping. There's still people. Matt Taibbi's dad was an anchor on MSNBC, CNN, and CBS for years. He's a multimillionaire. And he reported from the DC Beltway. They all know each other. It's a small club and we ain't in it. And these are the revolutionaries. Whether you support them or you don't, that's fine. I'm making the point. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
All those people who know each other and are friends are people I suspect of being LaRoucheites. And that also makes it an easy overlap because they know each other. It's easy for them to talk. Hey, how can we get some of these people into more spaces and get more attention to them?
When I was around Nick Brana, he had all of them in a thread and they would send messaging and what stories they were going to talk about and everything to each other. And one of the things that I learned is like Lee Camp's his best friend. He's the godfather of Lee's baby. So like all these people knew each other and I was like, God damn, this is just like the Democratic Party insiders that I saw. I was never a Democrat, but I saw their inside circles.
This is why I unfollowed Lee Camp. I don't know if you were watching my show then, but when Alex was still my co-host, I had Lee Camp. We had Lee Camp on to talk about Venezuela. But I also asked him, "Hey, what have you heard about
Venezuela?" Actually.
Yes, but I asked him, "Hey, what's going on with the People's Party? Have you heard about this?" But yeah, that seems like it's just a Democratic smear. And I'm really like, yeah, I know Nick. He's a good guy. And it's like, okay. And I pushed back a little.
I don't want to have to get into it and push.
And then I unfollowed.
Comment one way or another. He's comfortable or uncomfortable. You know, I was just kind of trying to bring it all up just to show that even on the left, we haven't moved outside of the hierarchical circles of this system, right? You know, I worked at orgs where they would prioritize people from Harvard and Stanford over people that went to state colleges as if that person has more qualifications and would be better suited even before we interviewed them. Oh, yeah. And I know this bias filters people out everywhere, but I kept seeing it. I saw it on campaigns I worked at, and I would have to sit down with the candidates who had good hearts. It's just so ingrained in us to have that response, to be like, oh, they went to Harvard. They must really know what they're talking about.
Know,
we have to unteach ourselves these habits.
The reason
taught us,
the reason that there's this myth of working class Joe is not because Joe Biden is in any way working class. His father owned a car dealership and gave him a Corvette for his 18th birthday. He did not come from wealth, but he came from wealth at the local level. His father was one of the guys in his town, not the guy, but one of the guys. And that matters. You know what I'm talking about, Zeynab, being one of the guys in a small enough town. And so the reason the working class Joe myth came about is because he went to the University of Delaware. He only went to a state college.
Well, that is kind of working class compared to the DC elite.
Yes.
Didn't he lie about his academic record?
Yeah, he didn't even do particularly well at the University of Delaware. And this is actually good because this gives me the chance to come up to recite one of my favorite rants ever, which is that Joe Biden, up until his run for president in 2020, when everyone conveniently forgot, Joe Biden lies like he breathes. Joe Biden has the same problem with the truth as Donald Trump, and he has his entire political career. Joe Biden has lied about his academic record. He has lied about his work record. He has lied about marching with civil rights leaders that he never met.
He had to drop out of the 88 primary because he got caught plagiarizing a Neil Kinnock speech.
So, that was
Really?
only the end. That was only the end of a series of repeated gaffes. That was the same time that he first told the lie about the. That was the first time he told the lie about graduating near the top of his class when he was actually near the bottom.
Right.
And this was when Connie Chung, Gira knows what I'm going to say. This is when Connie Chung said on the air, long before anyone ever said this about Donald Trump, Joe Biden is a pathological liar. And he is lucky that his brain exploded and he had a medical excuse to drop out.
Yeah.
Because he would have had to drop out anyway because nobody had any faith in him.
Yeah. And here we are. Here we are.
But it is important to understand that he didn't drop out technically because of the plagiarism or the pathological liar. Technically, he dropped out because his brain exploded.
Okay.
And I tried not to belabor this too much because I think it's ableist to belabor it too much, but at the same time, it shows how people think. Bernie had a mild heart attack.
I'm sorry, my dog's being crazy, y'all.
Bernie had a mild heart attack, something people come back from on a regular basis.
Right.
John Fetterman had a stroke, something else people come back from on a regular basis. Joe Biden had an aneurysm on such a scale that they had to go in and do emergency surgery to reconstruct his brain to keep him from bleeding to death inside it.
Aneurysms are routine killers.
And it is much harder to come back from that than it is to come back from a mild heart attack or even a first stroke.
I have to say, I did not know that, Chris.
And so, I mean, that's useful to know when people talk about Fetterman, who I'm not a supporter of, but who I think has done an amazing job of making people aware of what strokes do to people and has been very open and honest about it since becoming a senator, especially. And they mentioned about Bernie all the time. So I feel like it's important to mention that no one really talks about the fact that Joe Biden's brain exploded.
I never even knew that. Never heard
of it. So this is news to me, and I'm digesting it. And that
sounds like it was a while ago too.
It was in 1988, 1989.
Wow.
It was his reason for dropping out of the 88 election.
The one
it was his official reason.
Got the nod for.
And, I mean, I believe in there's potentiality for rehabilitation. Disabilities don't necessarily like scar you for the rest of your life. I mean, but his record after that.
Well, so here's the thing.
That's sort of my focus. You know what I mean?
He lied before his brain exploded.
History, though.
He lied before his brain exploded, so you can't blame his lying on the aneurysms.
True.
Because so maybe some of the memory lapses, but the thing is, did he really forget, or was he just lying? Who knows? And so, if you really want a conspiracy theory, I don't think this really happened. I think this is funny to ponder. I don't think this really happened. But what if the reason nobody really talks about Joe Biden's aneurysm, it was a total cover so that he could get out of that election with his dignity intact?
Oh, now that's hilarious. That would be funny.
But I don't think so. But yes, and this is important too. I brought this up. I called him Jim Crow Joe during the 2020 primaries.
Well, he supported segregation with
So I cannot oversell this. It's impossible to oversell this. You have to understand that the only thing enforcing Brown versus Board of Education at the time the Senate killed mandatory federal busing was mandatory federal busing. When mandatory busing was ended, that was the end of any practical integration resulting from Brown v. Board. Because no one is going to do what I think people should do, which is to make private school illegal and bus rich white kids to the quote-unquote worst schools in the city. But nobody's going to do that. That's authoritarian.
Right.
And yes, this is a very good quote to keep in mind when you think about what I just said. He didn't want his kids to grow up in a racial jungle.
Eulogize Strom Thurmond. There's another one. Add to that bucket.
Now, keep in mind that Trent Lott had to resign as Republican majority leader because of his eulogizing of Strom Thurmond. But Joe Biden was fine. He was cool as a Democrat.
What Trent Lott said specifically that got him in trouble.
It was offensive.
Was severely offensive that we wouldn't have all these problems that we have now if Strom Thurmond had been elected president back in what did he run?
All Republicans think that way, and yet well, not all Republicans. I take that back. All Republican leadership thinks that way, and yet they still felt it necessary to remove Trent Lott as majority leader over that.
Well, because they said, "Dude, shut up."
Yeah, but can you imagine? Can you imagine that happening now?
Yeah, no, not now. Not with this crowd of Republicans. Not with this crowd of Republicans. Oh man.
But at the same time, you look at the things that Joe Biden has said about Strom Thurmond. You look at the fact that he's campaigned against Democrats effectively for Congress.
I forget that. Was it? Oh God, was it in Oklahoma? Was it in Missouri?
He's in several places. The one that gets mentioned even in mainstream media is in Michigan, where he campaigned for Fred Upton.
That's the one I'm thinking of. Upton. Yeah.
That's not the only time it's happened.
$200,000 speaking fee.
He effectively, he didn't literally do it, but he effectively campaigned for Veronica Escobar's opponent after she was stepping up to take over for Beto.
Interesting.
And
he's got he's not a great guy. He's not a great guy.
No, Joe Biden is fundamentally, he is more personally culpable for more of our problems than anyone else who is still in politics today, with the possible exception of Dianne Feinstein.
Yeah, which is mystifying in that having had such a long career fucking this country up, that the Democratic Party would think he would in some way unfuck it. That is such a non sequitur to me.
So the Democratic Party was really signaling by Biden, we're just going to go back to business as usual. We don't think the country needs a correction course after Trump.
For sure. Yeah.
That's what Biden meant when he said, nothing is going to nobody's lifestyle is going to fundamentally change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in many ways, no different than Obama saying in 2009, when he asked, were you going to hold the Bush administration accountable for anything? Let's
never forget that even Obama, despite all his other failures, wanted to repeal Bush's tax cuts. And it was Joe Biden who went to Barack Obama with the deal that he had made with Mitch McConnell and said, look, he'll give you your budget if you just keep W's tax cuts. It's a good deal. Take it. And so they kept W's tax cuts so that Mitch McConnell would approve a budget. And it ended up being a Republican budget. And they still tried to repeal Obamacare through amendments in the budget. And it was just all sleazy. And that was the whole lesson that Biden supposedly learned from Obama's presidency, that you can't deal with Republicans in good faith and give everything up coming in.
No, of course you can't. Of course.
But
it's amazing.
But he didn't learn that lesson because he was the one convincing Obama to let the Republicans do all that.
Well, it wasn't. He didn't have. It wasn't that he didn't learn the lesson. He knows the lesson. He just has
sure.
He has no intention. Never had any
exactly
of expressing that lesson in through any kind of policy. No doubt at all.
And if Obama ever had any good faith at all, and I like to try to pretend he did, even though it's hard sometimes. But if Obama had any good faith at all, then the two biggest mistakes he made were, number one, making Joe Biden his running mate, and number two, making Hillary Clinton his Secretary of State. Both of those things were just signaling, yeah, I'm going to be the same kind of president you always had before.
Well, one of the big things is we're doing it right now in this convo, and it is fascinating, but we focus a lot on the presidency.
Yes, we
for
do.
Like solutions and for everything else. Congress is supposed to be passing legislation. They set the war budgets. They set the Pentagon budget. They set the budgets for our all of our social services, all of them. It's all Congress. All the presidency is really supposed to do is oversee oversight programs like the Department of Transportation. We should be fucking pissed at the president for. We should be pissed at the president for the things that the presidency is supposed to do, and everything else. We should have separation of powers because those are important. But I feel like, especially in the last 15 years, I've heard people shift from blaming Congress to all people ever talk about is presidency.
Well,
but something that Obama does, we're not going to see the impacts from Obama's full presidency until 10 to 15 years from now.
That's also true.
We're not going to see the impacts of Trump's. We're not going to see the impacts of Biden. Often, we don't see the full impacts of a president's presidency until they've been out of office or toward the end of their age.
Nobody who was watching in real time.
Half of it doesn't even go into effect that Biden's putting into place until later, except for things like Title 42, right? So,
now obviously we're all too young for this, but my parents would tell you that if you were there in real time in 1980, no one was going to tell you that Jimmy Carter was going to lost because he didn't turn out enough working class voters, because he didn't pass the legislation he promised he was going to pass, and he also deliberately imposed austerity through appointing a Fed chief who was so right-wing, Ronald Reagan kept him. So that's the thing, is that you actually look at Jimmy Carter's presidency through a historical lens, and it's, oh my gosh, he was a Reagan Democrat. When what people were saying at the time was, Jimmy Carter's going to lose re-election because he's too liberal. Which is what people were really saying in real time.
There's the separation again between what people are saying in the media and what people on the ground. We never hear what the country really wants because we've got neoliberals that are the people that are doing the news and out there talking. And 90% of the time, what they're saying about what working people want is complete and total and utter bullshit. And I know because I've knocked out, Jason, you have to, I've knocked thousands of doors across this country. I've talked to tens of thousands of voters. I've been doing messaging and campaigns and organizing for more than a decade. And I've listened. I've listened way more than I've talked to people. And what I've learned is most of what people assume about folks across this country is total and utter bullshit. So people are like, this sentiment was this at the time, and now I'm like, what sentiment? Like when they said Medicare for all was wildly unpopular, and everyone I talked to, whether they were conservative, they act like
wildly popular.
The country are a bunch of neo-Nazi, theocratic blah. But then you actually look at polling, and only 12% of the country supports, for instance, are anti-abortion. Of that fraction, most of them don't even support a full abortion ban.
Yeah.
The theocrats are such a small minority that has all the damn power. It's insane.
And they're so loud.
They're loud, but they have the power. They're passing hundreds of pieces of legislation that's literally turning us into more of a fascist country overnight. It's a crisis. We're in a crisis, and I'm upset by it, and I'm sorry, but right now, Indiana just passed an anti-LGBTQ bill yesterday that I had to talk to my daughter about how they can't talk about being gender fluid at school this weekend on her birthday because they're threatening to they would take my kid away. That ain't no joke. In Kentucky and in Texas, did you know that in Kentucky they're charging women $2,000 to $3,000 after their miscarriages to get screened to make sure they didn't have an abortion?
Yeah.
So you have a miscarriage, and then you go in and you have to pay money after you have a damn miscarriage. So people have sure, and if they think you had an abortion, they can send you to jail.
People have died because of Kentucky's abortion ban
already.
Yes, already.
What's happening right now? There are 385 pieces of legislation that are passing. Oh, and people are already talking about 2024. Stop. Like, it's good to talk about some candidates. We can start getting excited, but right now we're losing our state houses, we're losing our freedoms, and we're losing our rights every single day. What are we going to do about it? How are we going to
organize those elections? All state house elections are even year elections. There's no state house elections, I don't think, anywhere in the country that are 2023. There's county councils, there's city councils.
There's 8 states.
8 states that have those off-year elections. Okay,
Virginia has no, it's not Virginia, but yeah, there are several states that have weird.
But in the rest
of Virginia, country, they do have for some offices.
In the rest of the country, county councils, school boards, city councils, port commissioners, fire commissioners, water commissioners, hospital commissioners.
It's usually a 2 or 4 or 6 year term these days. Yes.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that's actually worth bringing up at this point is, I just joined the Green Party. I left the Democratic Party officially. I tendered my resignation as a Democratic Party PCO, spot that I've held for a decade and more, and joined the Green Party. And one of the things that I want to do with the Green Party and the greater left, not just the Green Party, but whatever, because we are talking about left coalition building. How the hell is the left actually going to exercise some power in the electoral system if it can be done? And one of the things that I did was I built a spreadsheet of all of the offices that are available to run for in 2023. Who holds the office right now, what the filing fee is, how long the term is. And if we can get leftists, Green Party, Socialist Alternative up here in Seattle, Progressive, whatever, if we can get people to just file for any office that they're eligible to run for, and hopefully do the job, feel like you can do the job, we would pick up, the left would pick up a bunch of those seats just by a good voter statement, and a lot of them have no filing fee whatsoever. And so I think it's important, we talk about how do you build a third party? How do you build a left third party? Well, hopefully the point of a party would be to, at least in part, get your members elected and elevate that.
So,
and people want to start for this, go for this top office.
So
where we could build a foundation.
Here's where I talk about political opposition then, because I've been looking for the lead-in for this. You don't just win. No party has ever just come out of nowhere to win. The Republicans lost their first presidential election. Andrew Jackson lost the first time he ran for president. The Whigs lost their first candidate for the first time they ran a candidate for president. The only party to ever win the first time they ran a candidate for president was the Federalist
Party
when they ran John Adams. Because
okay.
John Adams was the first member of the Federalist Party to run for president.
Right.
And he won. Washington agreed with the Federalist Party, but never joined.
Yeah, they list him as a Federalist, though.
They'll often list him as a Federalist these days, yes, but he never joined the party, and he was outspoken against political parties during his second term as president, and particularly in his farewell address. Yeah. There are some people who really fetishize the founding fathers, who still swear that we shouldn't have any political parties because of George Washington. And I mean, that's just how much we regard these people who were not good people, even by the standards of their own time. We hear this a lot. Judge people by the standards of their own time and not today's time. All right. Well, in George Washington's time, Virginia slave owners were saying that we should actually abolish slavery and phase it out in the Constitution over a 5 or 10 or 20 year period. And George Washington wasn't for that.
I was unaware of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
A man named James Mason, who ironically was the grandfather of George Mason, who was a Confederate bigwig and one of the fire-eating secessionists up to the Civil War. James Mason wanted to abolish slavery in its entirety as part of a 20-year phase-out in the Constitution, and instead he was only able to get them to phase out the international slave trade. And people like Washington were fine with phasing out the slave trade because they were already making most of their money from, as they said in the language of the day, selling people downriver. That's where the term sold down the river comes from people in Virginia selling their slaves down the river to the deep South, where it was a lot worse to be a slave. Tobacco stopped being the huge moneymaker that cotton was, and Virginia isn't a place where you grow cotton. Washington had diversified into things like hemp and opened up businesses, but he primarily made his money as a slave trader selling his slaves. Robert E. Lee primarily made his money as a slave trader selling his slaves. You don't hear this in history, but this is how the famous families of Virginia made their money, by selling their slaves down the river to the deep South. And while slavery is bad anywhere, it's important to understand that mortality was much higher on a Mississippi turpentine plantation or a South Carolina rice plantation or an Alabama cotton plantation than it was on a Virginia tobacco farm. People died faster. The climate was worse for them than Virginia. There was more disease. And the work was physically more destructive to their bodies because of the way these big plantations were run. There was also far more harsh discipline, which is not to say that people like George Washington and Robert E. Lee could not be horrific. They could. It's just that horrific was normal in Mississippi by comparison to Virginia. What people could get away with more because of the big plantation system that didn't exist to the same degree in Virginia. But these Virginia farm owners who were quote unquote better masters were the ones selling the slaves down the river. So were they really better? No. And that's how they made their money, again, by selling their slaves. The wealthy families of Virginia made their money selling their slaves because they could not maintain their income on tobacco in competition with places like Cuba and South America. But cotton was something the South could really make money on. So they made money on cotton by selling slaves to the cotton growers. That was one of the reasons the Nat Turner Rebellion happened in Virginia and not someplace further south. The security was much harsher, and it was much harder to rebel on these big plantations in the Deep South than on the Virginia farms. That's why John Brown thought Harper's Ferry was the best place to raid, because it would be easier for the slaves to have their uprising in Virginia. All this thought went into stuff that we don't think about now. And people thought George Washington was bad for making his living selling slaves in his own day. It's not a super modern thing. People like James Mason felt guilty that they made their money selling their slaves and wanted to wash it off themselves by abolishing it 20 years in the future in a way that their kids wouldn't be able to undo. And even as tepid as that is, they're not willing to abolish it in their own time, but they do want to make it go away in the future. The clear future that they're willing to delineate. Washington was against even that.
Well, that's neoliberals today.
Yeah.
It's kind of like...
well, it's like Joe Biden being against even the public option.
Yeah. One of the things that I've been hearing is talk of secession on the left and the right. And one of the things that upsets me the most is that someone like a Marjorie Taylor Greene, she actually used Kentucky as an example. She's like, let Kentucky go and be Kentucky and be as red as they want to be. And I'm like, you know what? The Democrats abandoned us. We don't have anyone running. So I need to figure out how to inspire a bunch of poor people to run for office and how we're going to get funds for them. But, with 58% of people not running, the Dems abandoning us, not having any third parties here, the left could give two shits about us because everyone, no offense to you guys, based on where you live, but, the people that live on the coastal areas, they don't give two shits about Kentucky or Ohio or Tennessee or Louisiana or Mississippi. Even the ones that I organize with, for the most part, have these misconceptions that everyone there are that way, or that the majority are, based on just voting records. And so
I want to say, this is a point that you bring up about, what has been said about these states. A lot of that came out with East Palestine, where you had the moderate Democrats are basically saying, fuck these people. They got to live with their own choices. They voted red.
No.
And I looked up the stats on Ohio, and it's 55-45. So you got 45% of, people voting blue there. And all these people have children, for God's sake.
Well,
the wildlife there doesn't vote.
They act like
the water doesn't vote.
they act like a 10-point victory for the Republicans somehow means everybody in the state is a Republican.
Right.
It's crazy. And the crazier thing is, a lot of people don't vote because they don't have anyone to vote for. So why show up if the seat's uncontested?
If you're
point in casting your ballot, if there's no one running against the incumbent, they're going to be set no matter how you vote.
Let's add the reason no one is running is because the Democrats don't just not run anybody. They also quietly tell people not to run. Otherwise, someone would.
They shut down campaigns. They actually shut down campaigns.
Look how fast there are 5 or 6 people running for an open congressional seat in a Democratic primary all the time. Now, maybe half of them drop out in the first few months. But, I mean, there's always like 5 or 6 people early on in any blue district. And then the party weeds it out somehow.
Except for Massachusetts, in most of the blue states, that uncontested was way lower. You know why? Because Republicans will run anywhere. So it's not uncontested because you have independents and you have like Republicans running in a deep blue state and a deep blue seat. They'll still run for it. Democrats will just be like, I had someone from the PCCC tell me that Tennessee, we didn't want help from them, but they insisted on a call. And what they were trying to do was talk my candidate out from running. And they called Tennessee a throwaway state. And I've heard that more than once. It's a throw. So when people are talking about these places seceding from the Union, in Kentucky, even 60% of conservatives don't support this anti-LGBT bill that just passed on Friday. 60% of Republicans or conservatives don't support it.
Well, in Kansas, which is about as Republican a state as you can think of.
Not really. No, it's not.
Well, but,
so don't say
I mean,
that.
as far as government goes,
brains not to call a state Republican, not to call it.
No,
Democrat.
I know. I agree with you. I want to. It makes my point better though if you start with that fallacy.
But
if you're going to accept the fallacy,
media creation, the blue-red state thing is a media creation.
Oh, of course.
So that they can have a big circus on election night.
This is my point. This stereotypical red state, Kansas, the most Republican place you can think of, voted not to ban abortion. The reason this happened was because they got it put into their constitution that they had a right to an abortion back before Republicans were gung-ho anti-abortion, which is something that people forget only happened in 1973.
Well, can I make a clarification?
Yes.
That was because this was a ballot measure. And the general public was voting on it and not the state house. And the general public isn't Republican.
Well, exactly.
The general public in Kansas
also
that conservative.
So
they voted overwhelmingly against this bill.
Yes.
In Kansas, they also voted overwhelmingly against the exact same bill in Kentucky. Both of those were ballot measures. When the state showed up without voting through the state house, without only having one choice, they voted in favor of progressive policy. In Tennessee, the ballot measure, they outlawed they wrote it in their constitution that prison slavery will no longer be allowed. They also opened up public clinics in Tennessee.
But the thing about Tennessee is a lot of people who will vote for progressive policy on a ballot measure will not vote for Democratic candidates. I know those people.
That's not true. Tennessee has a 62% unchallenged rate in their
Yes, but this is also true. But I lived somewhere where people were challenging reasonably often. We hated our Democrat governor. We hated our Democrat governor because he was a Republican, but we still hated our Democrat governor. And people didn't want to vote for Democrats because they didn't have any faith that Democrats would be any different. It wasn't because they hated Democrats for all the reasons that Republicans say people hate Democrats. They hated Democrats because Democrats had promised to be different than Republicans and then weren't.
So back in 2003, Michael Moore wrote his book, Stupid White Men.
Yes.
As somewhat of an analysis of the Clinton-Gore loss in 2000, somewhat of an analysis of how fucked up the Bush administration had been up until that point and looked to be in the future. And chapter 10 in that book is called Democrats DOA.
Mm-hmm.
And he talked about progressive policy that the Democrats claim to support, and then when they get an opportunity to support it, they completely walk away from it.
Yes.
And what he said was, the reason Republicans win is because people would rather vote for somebody who says what they're going to do, as heinous as it may be, says what they're going to do and follows through with it. Like, I know that guy, rather than say they're going to do something and you can't trust them to do anything. Can
I ask you a question, though?
Go ahead.
What's Michael Moore basing this on? What organizing?
I don't know. I would have to go read the chapter. I would have to go read the chapter.
I read one of the things about all of these pundits
talking about why people didn't trust.
Yeah.
Why people didn't trust Clinton Gore.
So
coming out of 8 years didn't trust Gore Lieberman coming out of 8 years of Clinton.
Well, so that's the whole thing, though, is that Clinton was, and this is something that people kind of missed. Clinton had a higher approval on his way out of office at that point than he had when he was in office. And Gore consistently polled lower than Clinton. And one of the things that hurt Gore, and this is counterintuitive because the media has said otherwise, one of the things at the time that hurt Gore was disassociating himself from Clinton and therefore offending Bill Clinton and
which
making
he tried hard to do. He worked hard saying, I'm not Bill Clinton.
And as a result, he earned the wrath of the Clintons. And people don't want to.
I think Moore's point was like, when we talk about what's going to motivate voters to show up, like, you think about some of these elections, and honestly, he was a menace. You know, Trump was a menace, and some of these people are absolute menaces, and they get elected. What is it in a more swing area that would lead that area to fall to a Republican rather than a Democrat? And it's, what kind of Democrat are they running in those swing areas? And they're usually mealy-mouthed, corporate, that people are just like, why do I want to show up for this guy? Why is it of any benefit to me to bother casting a vote for this person? I'm not even going to take the time.
True.
And that's what people don't talk about.
And if by some miracle a Democrat that you might believe in runs in your district in Texas or Tennessee, they get no support from the National Party.
Yep.
Good.
Yep.
No, I'm just kidding.
Well, no, because when I say this,
I'm making a joke. I'm being
no, I know, but just imagine the best example I can think of still is, I said this. Both of you guys know who Donna Iman is.
Yes.
She ran in a district in Texas in 2020 that was on the DCCC's red to blue list, which means, in theory, her district should have been a huge priority for all sorts of party money in 2020.
But she was a true progressive.
Yes, she was. But she ran based on she had this strategy that she told everyone about that was based on the notion, look, this is one of their red to blue states. All we have to do is win the nomination, and then we can really take back Texas. And then you see from the total lack of support from the state party in their red to blue district, just how much the DCCC really cares about taking back Texas.
Yeah.
They don't care. They didn't support Lindsey Fagan. They didn't support Rick Trevino. They didn't support Adrian Bell. They didn't support Vanessa Adia. Some of those candidates came damn close to winning.
They didn't even support the people whose names everybody will recognize from Texas in 2020, like Mike Siegel and Julie Oliver.
Right.
Now, and mind you, I think Donna was way left of them, but I also know she was friends with Julie Oliver and they got along. And I knew people in Julie Oliver's campaign that I really thought well of, so I'm not going to put anybody down. But
I'll tell you a little story in Illinois. I had the pleasure, I will say, because I thought she was pretty decent, of being in a room with Marie Newman. Marie Newman was a one-term congressperson, 2018 to 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason she was, when you look at the hard numbers, she was really one of the most prolifically progressive members of Congress in terms of submitting legislation.
Yes.
That was, no, a lot of that legislation went nowhere, but she submitted bill after bill after bill. Now, Illinois lost a seat after the census.
Yes.
And in the redistricting, the Illinois state legislature, which is 2/3 controlled by Democrats in both houses, redistricted her into the same district as Chuy Garcia.
Of course.
So that was a way to knock off one progressive in Congress, and she refused to run against Chuy. She went back to her district that she was districted out of and ran against Sean Casten because she said, Chuy Garcia is a good congressperson. I'm not going to challenge him. Good on her for doing that. But that was the democratically controlled Illinois state legislature that did that to progressives.
So
to knock a progressive off the post.
So this is a good thing to talk about because, we talk about red states. So let's talk about blue states. They aren't blue states. People here aren't voting for the Democrats we have because there are enthusiastic choices. We're voting for the Democrats that we have. Well, I shouldn't say we because I don't vote I don't vote much anymore. But we vote the people in Oregon are voting for the Democrats who are running. Oregon has a traditional race. It's a Republican and a Democrat. We're very well aware of the fact that we're 4 blue counties in a red state. So the Oregon voters will always vote for the Democrat because they're scared of the Republicans. But I live in the bluest part of Oregon. And the mayor of Portland, just over the river, is a Michael Bloomberg Democrat who is police commissioner, and his nickname is Tear Gas Ted among certain elements of the community.
That does not surprise me, having been to the protest marches in Portland.
Yes. And I mean,
gassing my eyes.
We're talking about Portland cops tear gassing people in wheelchairs, tear gassing old people, and shooting rubber and talking on walkie-talkies to the members of Patriot Prayer, shooting at protesters from rooftops.
And Portland is often identified as one of the most progressive cities in the country.
Well, let me say something really quickly compared to other places. So one of the things that I'm working on right now is a project to focus on Appalachia, the red states, and everything else, because every organizing call I've ever got to takes us to Washington. No offense to you guys. Takes us to Oregon, takes us to New York City, takes us to Massachusetts.
But what are they?
They're always centered on the Democrats right now. They're always centered on convincing the people in their area of how bad Democrats are. I don't blame them. I think that that's 100% necessary. But the only thing I want to say, so that you can get back to that, is that Oregon, the cities in Oregon are still a lot more progressive. You guys have this problem. But for instance, in Kentucky, there's right to work laws. You can't form a union, basically. I mean, you can in Oregon. Oregon has ballot access measures. You guys can change things by ballot measures all the way from down in the municipalities all the way up to the state house. We have no such rights.
Yeah, but we have
we have no health clinics. Oregon has health clinics. Our public libraries are being shut down.
And I will give Oregon credit.
Is only federally subsidized at 8%. In Oregon, it's subsidized at 42%.
All relative, yes.
I will give Oregon credit. We have the best Medicaid program in the country here in Oregon.
So there is a difference. One thing I've been telling folks in blue states is there is a massive difference. And I'm not saying that obscures whatsoever what people are going. We should be fighting for the basic human rights and the basic necessities of humanity across the country, regardless of where you live. So one of my jobs that I need to start doing now is I need to reach out to Appalachia. I need to reach out to the Rust Belt. I need to reach out to the South and talk to people about organizing. Because right now I'm in a beltway on the left and there's none of my people there. There's none of us there hardly. No one. And so what the focus has been on the left, from pundits to organizers, has been really heavily talking about the Democratic Party, talking about switching the Democratic Party, talking about building third parties, which is needed across the country. And I get it. And that is needed. But in the states where they're literally passing laws that can, I think it's Iowa that's passed a law now that women get the death penalty if they have an abortion.
Iowa's trying to pass that law, yes.
Oh, no, it went through the state house.
Did it pass?
It went through the House. So now it goes through the Senate, and people don't think the Senate are going to stop it.
Yeah, we'll see them. Yeah, that's
Iowa also, well, I think it's going to pass because it's passed basically everywhere else that they're pushing that. It's 15 to 20 years. Texas, it's 99 years. It would be the only state with the death penalty, but I think it's going to pass. In Iowa, they also rolled back the child marriage age to 8 years.
That would be
in 9 states now, they have rolled back rape charges against your husband. We're fucking Gilead.
There was a state rep.
Tale, and there's leftists saying, well, let these red states secede. These red states aren't conservative. We don't want this shit. Nobody's running for these seats. There's a minority rule, and it is as fascist as it gets. They're doing CRT. Some states are now threatening to reverse gay marriage. There were 4 states that I was reading that have propositions on the docket right now to reverse racially diverse marriages.
Yes.
And you know why they're doing this? They're doing this because the Republicans have worked so hard to get the Supreme Court.
Yes.
That's why the presidency mattered back then. But to get the Supreme Court packed, that now that they have this new Supreme Court,
you can pass whatever they want.
Rough ship, because they are more confident that these laws will be upheld by the Supreme Court. So they're running roughshod over everything.
The point of getting control of the Supreme Court was always to allow a time machine to take us back before the North won the Civil War. I would even go further than that. There are people who think in the Republican Party that Andrew Jackson, maybe the worst president we've had on an objective moral scale, Andrew Jackson was a horrible liberal who just should never have let white men who didn't own property vote. They even want to take that. They would even take the vote away from white men who don't own property if they could. I believe that.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to sound so impassioned and like frantic right now, but most of these laws have passed in the last 2.5 to 3 weeks. And then I was reading about a ton of them today. And so like my nerves are just on edge and I feel like a crazy person. And then dealing with, the last month, people telling us to work with white supremacists and Nazis and all this stuff because the country, they're not half the country. We don't have to placate to Nazis to get things done. In fact, that's a lie and a mythology. And we are literally people telling us until we end the wars, until we end, the war in Ukraine, there's no reason to organize here. The people that tell us our state houses don't matter. The people that kind of scoff at what's happening in the red states because it's not happening in theirs, because they're not the ones that are going to be carted off if they think you had an abortion, or that are going to your kids. In Florida, a law just passed 3 days ago, or not 3 days, 4 days ago. It passed. It's law. People can bring kids down to Florida from another state, not just parents, so grandparents. So you got some crazy ass theocratic grandparent, they can steal the kids, and all they have to do is claim that they were getting transgendered, and they can kidnap them to Florida and have immunity in Florida. So an abusive husband can take the kids down to Florida and can be in Florida and have immunity, and it's not considered kidnapping if he just claims that one of those children were being turned into transgender, or getting transgender therapy, or getting transgender treatment from their parent. So that could mean letting your child dress how they want to dress.
Well,
so you can kidnap kids now. I want a second. Take this full thing in. If you guys have kids, I don't know if either one of you do. Somebody can kidnap your kids. That's a family member. Take them to Florida and claim that you were trying to make your kids trans, and they have immunity in Florida.
Yep.
That is one of the most insane things I have ever heard in my life. And that's kind of one of the reasons I keep coming back to this, because it's so, I don't know how you guys feel about that. Like, Jason, what does that feel to you when you hear that? Like,
Florida was the first state that passed, that tried to pass the you can run over protesters with your car law.
Wow. Yeah, I remember that, actually. Yeah. Well, my kids are older now, so my daughter's going to be 20 here.
So in some states it's 20. It goes up to 25. In other states,
I'm actually reading about child marriage laws. It says here, and this is from 2017. It says there are 25 states that do not set a minimum age at which a person could get married, but they have some other restrictions, like you would have to have parental consent.
But there's the thing: whoever really heard of a child marriage without parental consent? Who makes a child marriage happen in the first place?
Right, exactly. Yeah, sure. That's wild. I mean, for sure. But Iowa was not on the list. California is, though.
Yeah, California is one of them. Iowa was more recent, and I believe that they rolled back the age to 8.
So what I was reading here is the state that has the actual lowest minimum age set is Massachusetts, and it's 12. So that's like a state law. Somebody as young as 12 can get married in Massachusetts.
Which is insane. Yeah. I believe, though, that there's some states that don't even have an age limit as long as they have parental consent. So that would actually be lower than Massachusetts.
About half the states are in that category.
It's wild.
But the Massachusetts law is nuts. So there are some blue states that have crazy ass laws. People should be kids.
Well, it's got nothing to do with red or blue. Fun fact: West Virginia was a blue state for far longer than it was a red state. As such, things are reckoned.
People don't know that when Reagan won his landslide victory in 1980, and you looked at a sea of red all across the country,
yes,
and a couple of little blue dots, and West Virginia was one of them.
Yes, yes,
that's awesome.
And people forget that, but the thing is that the reason that West Virginia was Democratic for so long had to do with the way parties shifted and the fact that
unions and coal mines and
well, so that's the thing, is remember that in the coal wars it was Woodrow Wilson who had bombs dropped on the West Virginians. So you have to remember that during the heyday of the unionization of the coal mines, The Democrats were not any more pro-union than the Republicans.
No, but I'm talking more in the 50s and 60s heyday of unions.
Sure, yeah. No, definitely.
Very, very democratically controlled.
Definitely during the 40s and 50s and 60s. And of course, West Virginia was also a very sadly Dixiecrat state because of the Redeemers. It is very important to understand the importance of Redeemers in rewriting American history and in making sure that people are poor in certain parts of the country. So who were Redeemers? Redeemers were white people of the plantation or large farm owner class who had enjoyed power before the Civil War and who were replaced in various places by more pro-union figures, whether their state seceded or not. If their state seceded, then they stayed in power during the war, but were replaced by pro-union figures who they had oppressed during the war. If their state didn't secede, they were replaced by the pro-union figures who kept their state from seceding, but came back with a vengeance a couple generations later. The Redeemers are fundamental to the reason that Appalachia, which it is important to remember, Kentucky did not secede. West Virginia seceded from Virginia in order not to secede.
Right, but not from the Union.
There was an East Tennessee secession movement from Tennessee to stay with the Union that was violently quashed in the process of Tennessee seceding. They locked people up to keep them from doing anything to stop them from seceding. This is not widely known these days, but all these parts of Appalachia that are so poor now were pro-union in 1860 and were punished for it when the pro-Confederate people took power again.
It does look like, just to be accurate, that Iowa has upped their age now. So that's good.
That is
undid
good.
that legislation because people raised 10 tons of hell.
Good.
But they have apparently this week proposed a ban on same-sex marriage.
Of course.
So, you know, that's something that happened this week. And I moved to the garage, so I wasn't allowed. But yeah, the only reason I'm blowing the whistle on this is because all these bills are like coming up, like have been passing or coming up in the next little bit. So this is all happening in very real time, and it's wild to watch how quick it's just getting thrown out there, and it's passing these state houses. And so, you know, and I think it's going to pass, you know, yeah, Maine and Massachusetts, it looks like they have no restrictions on child marriage. So there's like 13 states that have zero restrictions that, you know, folks can go to and drive to marry like whatever age they want. But it's these kinds of things are often issues that are somewhat overlooked, but impact certain communities, you know, that just aren't, I don't know why, but the mainstream media is not really covering this, and it's not being talked about. Mm-hmm. So yeah, Bird and the KKK.
This is true. And I will say first that this is absolutely true, but I will also add a but, a very big but. People make a great deal about Joe Biden's picture with Byrd. But of the two, Joe Biden and Robert Byrd was the one who admitted to being racist, who admitted to having done wrong, and who apologized to black people. Whereas Joe Biden has lied and said he marched with their civil rights leaders.
I'll say another thing about Robert Byrd. I'm
not defending Robert Byrd, by the way. I'm
no
casting shade on Joe Biden.
Saying that you are, but just an interesting fact about Robert Byrd. was he was not in favor of the Iraq War. In fact, he ended up voting for it, and I think only Wellstone voted against it. But Robert Byrd gave an impassioned speech in the lead up to Iraq that basically said the Senate was abdicating its job by not even debating whether we should be engaging in war.
There were huge debates over World War II. There were isolationist Republicans who were solidly against entering into World War II right up until Pearl Harbor. There were even some Republicans who were against war with Germany and only wanted to declare war on Japan.
Sure. Yeah.
Herbert Hoover said we should only declare war on Japan because we had no reason to declare war on a country that had not attacked us.
A lot of our business people, Bush family being part of it, we're doing a very tidy sum of business with the Nazis.
So
True.
So this is something that I love the chance to talk about, because we talk about, people deny Nazism like Nazis are some phenomenon from the 1930s and 40s that don't exist today. Or they talk about neo-Nazis like the white supremacists we have now are somehow different from the old Nazis and aren't Nazis. We have to put some sort of extra descriptor on them. And that's not actually true. A perfect example of this is in 1946, because we thought that this was important to the Cold War, we rescued Nazis from Ukraine and Belarus, and we settled them in Calgary and in New York. And some of the people who went back, some of the people who started Nazi parties when Ukraine became independent, were people who came back from the US because their parents had been Ukrainian Nazis and they were returning home to start Nazi parties in Ukraine. That's not neo, that's continuity. When the children and grandchildren of Americans like Henry Ford, who supported Hitler, advocate for public policy that favors the same sort of social controls that Henry Ford favored, that's not neo, that's continuity. When Woody Johnson of New York Jets fame is Robert Wood Johnson IV and is supporting Trump with the same family money that supported Hitler, that's not neo, that's continuity. Am I making any sense?
For sure. Of course. Yes.
This is a family thing. Nazis run in families. Nazis teach their kids to be Nazis. And we want to pretend like this stuff happens in a vacuum, out of nowhere. And that's not how it works. And the only reason, you look at quote unquote red states with a high Nazi concentration, and you find Michigan. Now, Michigan during the Civil War was gung-ho pro-union. Michigan Wolverines is a term that comes from the Civil War. Wolverines were militia troops who volunteered for the Army after their 90-day militia junkets were up in Michigan. The Iron Brigade, which was the toughest unit in the Army of the Potomac during the Civil War came from Michigan. You have all this pro-union stuff, and now you've got people flying Confederate flags in rural Michigan. How did that happen? And it's just this whole red state, blue state thing. In a lot of cases, people aren't even particularly conservative when they have a chance to vote in an election that doesn't have parties associated with it, but identify as Republican as soon as it becomes red versus blue. Then at the other times, on the other end, you've got large numbers of people who don't vote at all, unless something like this statewide referendum is happening, because they have no faith in either Democrats or Republicans.
And most people consider themselves independent.
Faith in government all across the board.
Yeah.
Understandably so.
Well, and the trouble is, though, is if you've lost your faith in government, then, well, the Republicans appeal to that, and the Democrats don't.
That is a key point. It really is.
And I think that is why there's always this reactionary streak to run towards the good conservatives who share some of our values, among some on the left who aren't serious in their opposition to things like racism and capitalism or patriarchy. Because, they're comfortable with those things. They're threatened by big changes to the status quo, and it's easier to run to Marjorie Taylor Greene and pretend that she's somehow a populist than it is to recognize that this whole falsehood of populism on the right is part of this fake dichotomy that tells us the Democrats are the left and the Republicans are the right, when really it's all the right.
How many people do you think actually believe that Marjorie Taylor Greene is some kind of populist and a great person?
And you see, that's a really good question.
Because I feel like we see things on Twitter and we see pundits say things and we see things from the media.
So
I feel like there's a disconnect.
She comes from an extremely wealthy family.
So
yeah.
when I talk about these people who accept this idea of populism, I'm talking about people in mainstream media to a certain degree who talk about right populism as if Trump was somehow a populist.
No, he was not.
And I'm talking about certain people on the left. Kyle Kulinski comes to mind. Crystal Ball comes to mind. Jimmy Dore comes to mind. Who all express this belief in some sort of right-wing populism. Chris Hedges comes to mind, though he's not a podcaster, that somehow unites people on the left and the right on things like healthcare and opposition to war. But I don't think they're paying attention to who the right-wingers they're talking about really are. I mean, and I'll be honest, I think Crystal Ball knows when she's full of shit the same way it was recently revealed that Tucker Carlson knows when he's full of shit. One thing that we do not say enough is that, Crystal Ball took 6 figures of salary for running a PAC that spent a low 5 figures on elections and doesn't feel that there's anything wrong with that. Now, we can argue whether there's anything wrong with that or not, but that's what she did. 6 figures in salary for a PAC that gave, I think, $27,000 in all the elections during all the time she ran the PAC. So if that's all they're spending, why is she collecting a 6-figure salary? What are they doing? And
well, there's a lot more that I'm not defending. I don't know. So I can't answer that. But I can answer the question that there's a lot more that a PAC can do than donate money. That's one of the things that people don't understand. They'll say, okay, PACs donate money sometimes.
I'm not talking about donating
like
money.
the least resource you can get to a candidate.
Which is different. I'm talking about spending, not donating, which is different.
You can't really spend. You're limited on spending too at the same amount that you're limited to donate. But you can do things like phone bank. You can do things like organized door knocking and canvassing. There's a lot. There's just
the main thing. The main thing that PACs can do, especially now, is soft money, which is to run issue ads that are really extremely partisan ads targeting candidates in a negative way, often by name, without saying you're supporting somebody. And this is a big part of what mainstream Democrat and Republican PACs spend money on, is negative advertising. Now, we talk about not campaigning negatively as progressives sometimes. I don't want to go low.
I didn't. I took shot. They were all completely grounded, but sure. I went after Rick Larson's jugular.
But nobody was spending soft money to run negative ads against Rick Larson.
No.
Not even Crystal Ball.
No. And that would have been really helpful, because I swear to God, if people knew 1/10 of what he has done in Congress.
But here's the whole thing. If these progressive unmute.
You can do that if you're a super PAC. Sure. If you're an unconnected federal PAC and you're spending money for ads, it gets really iffy. So
I know.
One thing that you can do, I know these like
the super PAC have
I'm trained in this.
So I'm
just letting you know
privileges.
Yeah, you can do it if you're just to clarify, like you can do it if you're a super PAC. So if you're a super PAC, you can do ads for anyone you want to do. You could do ads against the opponent, but for federal PACs, that's considered a coordinated campaign, even if you're not coordinated, and you can't spend money on that. I know that for a fact, because that's one of the complaints people had about BNC. So we had to deal with that.
But here's what's funny though. Nobody makes that complaint against the soft money PACs spending that money for the Republicans.
Yeah, I mean, of course, some people get away with it because it's never filed with the FEC.
Sure.
But they'll do it to like a progressive PAC. They'll file all kinds of complaints.
Oh, of course they will. But that's a big part of the difference, isn't it? Because that progressive PAC isn't part of the club.
Right. Yeah. So they'll challenge you with anything.
And this is true.
Door knock. There's
this
all
is
kinds
true.
of things you can do.
Crystal Balls was a super PAC.
Okay. See, I don't know. I don't know anything about that. All that I know is the FEC regulations around.
No, but no, it was definitely a super PAC and not the regular federal PAC. Connor is right. But yeah, no. So I mean, okay. So she's doing it so she doesn't get investigated. So if why have a super PAC if it's not doing the things a super PAC can do? Why not just have a regular PAC?
I mean, those are good questions to ask. Anyone that's.
But
I don't support super PACs though. So.
But if people ask,
never support a super PAC. Period.
But this is where the big controversy about Crystal Ball comes in, is the fact that she paid herself a lot of money from the point of view of any working class person anyway. Let's put that in. It doesn't seem like a lot of money to people in the Beltway all the time. That's why AOC can talk about being underpaid and always want to give Congress a raise, which I have mixed feelings about. I have mixed feelings because on the one hand, it's true. We want people in Congress to be able to take care of themselves and not only rich people to be able to run. But at the same time, is it good that housing in DC is so expensive and is giving Congress a raise the best way to address the cost of housing in DC?
Good question.
We have the same issues here with our state legislature in Washington. I think the salary for a state legislature was $48,000 not too long ago. I think they might have upped it a little bit, but it's not. I mean, for one person,
yeah,
to spend all that time running for a state legislature job, that is, if you've got a family. Now the legislature is only in session 2 months out of the year, 3 months out, depending upon what the session is, or they haven't extended. It's not a full-time job, but you get a lot of people who can't take time out of their full-time work where they're working class, taking care of a family, to run for a job that really is not going to pay them that much, that they can't keep a full-time job.
Now take it a step further. Keep in mind that in places that we think of as red states, people in the state legislature might not be paid, or they might only be paid for the time that the legislature is in session. They might receive a ridiculously low wage that would not be legal if they were employed in the private sector rather than serving politicians.
Leave those decision-making jobs up to people who can afford to be in that job because they've got investments or other businesses.
And then if all the people who are run for office are people who can afford to run for office, is it any wonder that it's a red state?
There you go.
Because I mean,
or in the case of Washington, our state legislature is both houses are held by Democrats,
so
slim majorities, but the kind of Democrat you get,
Well, so I live in Oregon. I've lived in California. I've lived in Tennessee. And what I will say is the Democrats are worse. The Republicans are worse in Tennessee, and the Democrats are worse in California. The Republicans have no power in California. The Republicans have no power to hurt anybody in California outside of specific counties. Large amounts of California, even at the local and county level, are controlled by Democrats, and Republicans have no chance. But, and this is a huge but, all the people who were the best Republicans in the 1980s are the worst Democrats now. And they very deliberately made that decision because they didn't want to be associated with the worst Republicans.
That's true.
So instead of being the best Republicans, they became the worst Democrats. Charlie Crist in Florida is one of these. He's in a red state or purple state, but still, he made that switch. At the end of his career, Arlen Specter from Pennsylvania switched from Republican to Democrat. Joe Manchin was a Republican once. Jim Justice, who's the governor and a Republican now, was a Democrat once and a Republican before that.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
There's a guy in Congress from New Jersey who's a Republican now, who was recruited to run as a Democrat because he was a Republican then. There's a dude in Arizona who is I'm going to swear, Everybody trigger warning. I'm going to swear. There is a dude in Arizona who is an honest fucking to God ALEC alumni. And he's a Democratic congressman. And for those of you who don't know, ALEC is one of the most offensive right-wing political groups in the world. They are one of the ones that have written...
They write legislation, hand it directly to...
They have written much of the anti-trans laws passing now.
Yep.
They've had them in waiting.
American Legislative Exchange Council. They've been around for a long time. And founder, if you remember...
2 alumni of ALEC are in Congress as Democrats.
Yeah.
Tom Halloran in Arizona.
Yep.
Debbie Wasserman Schultz in Florida.
I did not know about Debbie.
I knew that. I knew that because of who was running against her in 2020.
Yeah, we used that for Jen's campaign.
I had never heard of that. It was the first I'd heard of that.
Well, and I knew that about Tom because, you know, Eva was running against him. And I really wish that Eva would have won. You know, she's a real one, man. She's a badass.
Eva Pitsova?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I love her.
By the way, she actually texted me today, and she wants to know if there are any candidates who need some consulting because she's trying to get some consulting going.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
She was doing Catching Fire for a while. That was a really cool program.
I think she's still doing Catch Fire, but I don't know that that's a business for her. That's just kind of a progressive support organization. She actually wants to do consulting for progressive candidates. But I was going to say, ALEC has its roots in Christian conservatism from the late 70s, early 80s, and Paul Weyrich, one of the founders of the moral majority movement, and also ALEC, literally said, and this is because they write a lot of the voter suppression legislation also. He said in conference, we don't want people to vote.
Right.
And he said, quite frankly, our leverage in elections goes up when the voting population goes down.
Yep. All
That's
the voter suppression laws
that are saying, give up on voting. Let's not vote. We're not ever voting again. I'm like, people, we can't give up completely on electoralism. I know that people want to, but if we give up completely, we're doing exactly what they want.
So it depends on what else you're doing. The most valuable thing anybody can do right now, I'm going to beat this drum again, because while I am a revolutionary optimist, the fact has not changed that things do not look good right now. The most useful thing everybody can do right now is organize their community for mutual aid and defense. What do I mean by defense? Be ready to defend trans people in your community. Be ready to defend your neighbors. Organize to defend homeless people in your community from cops. This is the most important thing that we can do right now. These are the people who are going to be targeted. Do something about it. Organize to help the Black community next door to your community, for fuck's sake. This stuff matters.
One limitation of mutual aid, though, if everyone's poor and nobody has anything, you don't have space to grow a garden.
There's
limitations to it.
There's always limitations to mutual aid. However, the Black Panthers found ways around some of those limitations. And there are ways to find some ways around some of those limitations. And they will not be found if we are not organizing at the community level in the same way that the Panthers did. And when I say that, I do not mean all the fake BS that you're hearing from people who watched the wrong Jimmy Dore episode once, or the wrong Conversation Couch episode once. We don't need to be running to organize with white supremacists. The Black Panthers didn't do that. But what they did do was organize communities around the issues that mattered to the communities. And they also organized in solidarity with neighboring communities. And if those communities were Puerto Rican or Appalachian, and let's keep in mind about this, that the reason that folks in the Young Patriots are being smeared with the white supremacy label after the fact, despite the fact that if you Google the Young Patriots, one of the first things that comes up is a website by their survivors that tells their story and the story of the Rainbow Coalition, and links to other websites by surviving Young Lords and surviving Black Panthers. It's really something. So it's almost impossible to make this mistake unless you're deliberately smearing these kids because they were Appalachian transplants to Chicago. Because the reason they flew the Confederate flag was not out of any devotion to the Confederacy, but because they were making a statement, we are not from Chicago and we are being mistreated because we are new to this place. And when the Black Panthers said, this makes some of our friends and relatives nervous, they stopped flying the flag because they weren't white supremacists. If they were, they wouldn't have stopped. They wouldn't have listened to the request. They wouldn't have cared. They would have been like the people telling us not to care now. Do you not understand, folks? Okay, my rant's over.
Well, I've seen people. Here's the thing. We have to get smarter about it, because every day I've got someone that's dying because they have a medical bill. Help me share out this mutual aid. When I went homeless, $10, and I've been organizing 10 years. That's fine. No one's got it to help me. And I know that.
I know.
We're not able to give each other jobs because we don't have jobs we can give. Luckily, a good friend of mine that I've loved my whole life let me move in with them, or I would not have a place to live right now with my daughter.
And that matters.
So when it comes to that, like, I try to think of things like, what can we do? That I'm very, very pragmatic. So, what are the different ways that we can come in and help each other? And I think one side is electoral. And then I also think that another side is like growing gardens, doing mutual aid, helping each other the way you can, actually talking to your neighbors and being kind and being generous. Actual developed mutual aid networks that can help when we're doing things like unions. Right now, the Supreme Court, there's a case that can open up liability for anyone who's striking.
Yeah, that's grotesque.
So they're called Northwestern is a company that is literally trying to sue its union for liability for the damages of their equipment, as well as time lost on their product. But that's the point of that's the point of unionization and striking. Yeah. So if the Supreme Court passes this, and it's looking like they very well may, then that completely changes the way that we have to work or organize. Because on top of that, our police state has gotten insane. So realistically, even if you get a bunch of AK-47s for your family, they're gonna come rolling in on us on tanks. There's a lot of people that have this sort of like on the left that I've been talking to that sort of have this like glorified, we're going to have a bloody revolution and we're going to win idea.
Well, it's not just the left. The people on the right do this also. I mean,
God, yeah.
So
they're preparing for the civil
government.
Without trying to be too much of a doomer, people who are able to be and willing to be should be armed to defend their neighbors and themselves. And I'm not talking about a bloody revolution, though, it's important to understand that the Nazis talking about a new American Civil War are very serious, even if we don't want that. But that aside, bloody revolution aside, Nazis are shooting people. Nazis are going to keep shooting people. And at some point, we have to be able to defend. People have to be able to defend each other and themselves.
And if you're going to do that, this is an old redneck that knows how to shoot and had a conceal and carry license. I'm going to tell y'all, know how to put it away.
Yep.
Take some courses, know how to use it, know how to do it safe. My family, they've been hunting my whole life. We know how to keep things safe. We know how to, I don't currently have, but I have in the past. I had, defense, had arms for defense. It's like in case or something happened. So, but you have to be educated too about it and make sure that you're careful.
Join a group like the Socialist Rifle Association that actually pays attention to all the things that the NRA used to pay attention to.
There are local chapters of John Brown gun clubs.
Yes. Also a good choice.
Also another good resource.
There are good choices out there if you choose to go that route. Yes. And I agree with
it is like that's a big thing. Like learn how to use it, or you can hurt yourself more than protect yourself. So
I agree with Zeynab 100%. You want to protect yourself and others, not be a hazard to yourself and others. And that means being safe, responsible, and competent.
Yes. And also the highest rate of suicide or firearms. So consider your mental health before you purchase.
That is the other thing. The stats on gun deaths are that they typically come from the gun within the home. And so you have to have a lot of safeguards. You have to be careful. Yes. It is a tool. It is not a toy. All of that stuff.
And the number one causes of death, one of the largest, like the highest rates of homicide for women are from domestic partners that are armed. So, it's just all of these things need to be taken into consideration. So if you're considering that and you're with an abusive partner, please take that into consideration.
Yeah, definitely.
We don't make it easy for people to get away from abusive partners in this country.
No, we don't. And all too often the law favors the abusive partner if the person being abused uses violence to defend themselves, which is just disgusting. But
there's people that are abused that were abused that are on trial. I mean, at this very moment for literal self-defense.
Well, there was someone, and all sorts of people beat the drum about trafficking for all sorts of arguments to persecute sex workers. But there's a woman who's in prison now because she was convicted of murdering her trafficker to get away.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, it's depressing.
It is.
It's all depressing. And we can.
And this is another reason people disengage.
Yeah.
Because it's depressing.
It's depressing.
I thought about getting
completely hopeless.
I don't have any money, but I was like, I need to save up money, get a trailer. I'm moving out to the woods with a trailer. I'm going to pull full Kentucky. I'm going to plant myself a little garden. I'm going to start doing artwork, and I'm going to sell it like my mom did. And like, unplug from everything. I've considered that before because I'm like, but at the same time, I think if we all do that, they're going to find ways to encroach on that little piece of peace that we're trying to create. We're not going to have it. So we also can't ignore this.
The thing I think about is, let's say we pass gun control, meaningful gun control, not the fake gun control that is the arms, the assault weapons ban in the Senate now. That's fake gun control. If you read that bill, you learn that it doesn't ban a single gun that's already in somebody's hands, and it doesn't ban that person from selling that gun. It just bans the manufacturers from making new guns. So all the guns that all the bad people have don't go away. The super owners who own 90% of the guns already aren't affected. They keep their guns. They can still trade them back and forth between themselves.
What is the stat on gun ownership in this country? I hear it's not that much. I hear it's somewhere around 22%.
I don't know the gun ownership statistics.
I think it's somewhere around 22% of households actually have a gun.
What I know is like the ownership, 90% of guns are owned by like
3% of people. Yeah.
3% of the people, and most of them own, and most of the people in this category own ridiculous amounts of guns.
Yeah.
What they call the super owners.
The kind of closet that they would show you behind a wardrobe that you would see in a movie.
The funny thing is, I'm in Oregon. I know super owners, or at least, moderate super owners, people who are excited about their new gun all the time. But at the same time, only one of them is actually only one of those people is actually a Republican.
Interesting. Yeah.
I mean, one of the largest gun owners
control
are actually independents, and they a lot of owners especially in flyover country and rural areas own guns so that they can go hunting.
Oh yeah,
people go hunting, and that's how they literally eat in the winter.
Oh no,
the only time I ever had a gun was a hunting gun.
I have friends who are serious about hunting, but I also have friends who own handguns and submachine guns that they're never going to use to hunt. They own them because it's cool to take them to the range. And when you shoot that gun at the range, everybody respects you. all the men and their toys stuff.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. It's boys.
I had a friend, local friend here, who said, I can take care of the gun problem with one simple law. Just say all guns can't be manufactured, or you can't have a black colored gun anymore. You gotta paint them all pink.
I don't know. I think there are lots of people who wouldn't have a problem with that. But
I know someone that has a pink gun.
I know people.
Funny, but it is someone who has a little redneck female, and I love her, but she has a pink gun.
But the point is, a lot of people own guns because it's cool and macho and status, and
even a lot of people with very good political reasons with the Socialist Rifle Association or the John Brown Gun Club own guns because they're cool. Let's admit that now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a boys and their toys thing. It's why there are people it's why people who can afford it are into cars. Though girls are into cars too, let's be fair.
There are some girls who are into guns too. Let's
True.
not leave the girls out of the guns. So
that's true.
Hey, Chris, I got to wrap it up in about 8 minutes.
I understand.
9 o'clock. I got to go do family stuff.
Well, it's a good time it's a good time to just about wrap anyway. The main thing I wanted to say about opposition, which is always my point, and dang it, we got sidetracked and didn't really talk about Marianne.
We can do that another time if we
Fair
feel
enough.
like it.
We can use the last 8 minutes to talk about it.
But no, actually, that's a good. Nobody should be unopposed.
Yeah.
This whole thing.
Just for the audience, I am a Marianne Williamson supporter and surrogate. Marianne is a friend of mine. If you look at her platform, Marianne 2024, Marianne2024.com. I'm on her policy team. The policy that is up on the website right now is the most progressive that any national candidate has put out ever, and it's because of me and the other people on the policy team.
Will Marianne, we've got
Go ahead.
7 minutes. I'm going to ask the question.
Do it.
Will Marianne take a serious stand on public health policy and Joe Biden's failure on COVID?
Actually, yes, we have. We have now a lot of these, and I got to be cautious about what I say, because a lot of this has to go through, is the language right? Are we saying the right thing in the right way? But I want to say yes, we have a COVID and general pandemic preparedness statement of here's how we would approach this. We recognize, again, because it has not been approved, take this with a grain of salt, but these are policy things that have been written down, that a lot of it has to do with, one, we are in full support of single payer health insurance, and people getting the medical treatment that they need when they need it. That is a huge factor. We know that the Congressional Budget Office said that not only was single payer health insurance a mass, and I know that doesn't cover the whole thing, but let me just say that when we talk about cost, efficiency, preventive care, not having that burden, not having people delay treatments, having vaccines be produced by the federal government at cost.
Now, I agree with a lot of that, but I will also say that without the kind of, I'm dropping names, I'm dropping her name again, without the kind of public health infrastructure build out that Donna Imem was the only candidate really talking about in 2020.
There's no doubt that you have to have the infrastructure.
The simple fact is, if everybody who could afford to go to the hospital, hospitals would have filled up faster at certain stages in the pandemic.
Absolutely. So we talk about, building that public infrastructure. We talk about a federal jobs guarantee, where we are putting those resources to building infrastructure in rural communities, that we are also will be pushing for free community college, free public colleges. Private colleges can do their thing. We're not talking about banning private colleges, but state colleges should be free. Vocational schools and training should be free, so that we have a workforce that is being well paid at a living wage to build the infrastructure that we need, that these students, we have a deficit of doctors and nurses and medical professionals in general, but a lot of people will, first of all, they are priced out of college to begin with regardless. They're certainly priced out of an 8+ year medical degree, where they come out of college hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. So we're for full debt cancellation and making higher education free, so that we get that trained professional cadre that can deal with health.
I'll be totally blunt. You can say lots of good things and bad things about Cuba all you want. We need Cuba's program for training doctors.
Absolutely no. Cuba, it has done some amazing things under the worst economic conditions that have been imposed on them by this country.
Every nation state has certain problems with oppression. It's unavoidable in the business of the nation state.
Yeah.
That said, Cuba is one of the very few where the president apologized for oppression to oppressed people and promised to do better.
Yeah. Well, listen, I hope at some future date that
we need to do a show straight up about the Marianne's campaign. Sure. Definitely.
Marianne's in South Carolina right now. She's going to spend a week in New Hampshire in a day or two. So obviously, as a campaign, we are focused on early primary states, because that's what we got to do. Nevada, Michigan, Georgia.
I believe someone should stand up to Biden in the Democratic primary, even though I'm not going to vote in it.
And that's fair. That's totally fair.
And
on that,
I have people I would prefer it be.
Sure.
I tell you right now, honestly, that the person who I would ask to run if it was my decision, again, as someone who isn't even going to vote in a Democratic primary, I would say Julian Castro should run. And the reason I say Julian Castro should run is I have reasons to believe that he's more progressive now than he was in 2020.
Now, when he ran in 2020, before a lot of other people, like before Bernie had decided he was going to re-enter for 2020, Julian Castro had hands down the most progressive platform of anyone.
And let's be frank, his border platform was better than Bernie's.
Sure. Well, he's got the experience. He knows what's going on there.
And in the area, and his plan to totally decriminalize is just right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But that said, Marianne's the only one standing up right now, and so it's good. Biden needs to be opposed.
And the one thing I would like to say about when people say a lot of the criticism is, she should be running, if she's going to run, she's just a grifter. She should be running as a third-party candidate. I think we have to be realistic about the chances of third-party candidates mounting. The media can ignore them. The Democratic Party can ignore them. Jill Stein got 0.7% of the vote nationally. I think Howie Hawkins got maybe 0.4% of the vote.
And Howie Hawkins even got on Morning Joe the day before the election.
Sure. But, we've got to understand, if we are actually really going to challenge the system, it's going to have to be within the Democratic Party. But that doesn't mean that if you vote in the Democratic presidential primary, you can't go vote third party in the general election. Those are really
That's absolutely true. Also, and this is where I want to end my.
It depends on which state you're in, though, too.
It's true.
Is that true? You would have to re-register. There would be a registration issue?
Some states you can't, like Ohio.
Well, some states.
Ohio. Go ahead.
All you've got is Democrats and Republicans because of the way things are constructed.
Yeah.
And then
Green Party and other third parties don't have a 50-state infrastructure.
Exactly.
They simply don't.
Well, that and the voting registration laws are different in every single state. There are many states that have closed primaries, where you have to be registered a certain amount of time before the elections to get out.
Right.
So a big voter registration drive would be huge. If there's a little bit of a challenge there, because Gen Y and Gen Z is the largest voting bloc in American history, but they don't like either party, and they definitely don't like them. So there's a little bit of a challenge there in getting them to register. But that's where, you guys will likely see the biggest shift in being able to get voters out for her primary, because that's what happened with Bernie. The voter registration went way up for Bernie.
I don't vote shame anybody. I think everybody's got to vote their conscience and vote the way they feel comfortable. What I object to is the hardcore, you're a fucking asshole for doing this. You're taking away power from the left. You're, fuck you. You're a traitor to the left. I am doing what I think is the right thing to do in this moment. It doesn't have any bearing on what I would do in future elections, but I think in this moment, as Chris said, Joe Biden needs to be challenged within the party. And we've got a platform that can do it. Nobody has any illusions that this isn't a massively steep uphill climb. There are definitely some policy sticking point issues for the left, and we can discuss those in the future. We're aware of all these things. The DNC is just going to shut you out, and they're going to rig it. Yes, of course they are. And we will be there to call them out for doing it. He
needs to bring people on that know how elections work. Not me, because I ain't doing it. I ain't doing a president. But I would give advice to Marianne, as far as that goes. But you all need to, the big thing she needs to do is bring people on that understand how the voting's going to work, have the strategy, and for God's sake, don't bring on people from the Democratic Party that are going to have you run your race. Like
nobody.
Listen, we have conversations about what happened with fucking Jeff Weaver and Nina Turner, because I was out in Cleveland canvassing for Nina Turner in her special election, and I saw Jeff Weaver there, and I was like, "What the fuck are you guys doing here?" And it was just bad strategy. He ran ads that he didn't. They spent money where they shouldn't have spent money. We as a team, and this, I'm not critical of Nina. I love Nina. But we as a canvassing team and a volunteer team out there on the ground, like, we were hitting it hard. We were hitting doors. But there were not nearly, and we were like, where is the investment in the ground game? You have to get out and talk to people. There was almost no ground game. They thought they could win an election in this district by running a bunch of ads that people weren't going to hear.
That's what the establishment does every time, Jason.
Running against ads where the Republican or the Democratic establishment has more money to run more ads. And when the attrition factor comes into play, they win. Why are you playing that game? Put money in the ground game, get people out on the streets, talking to voters and knocking on doors.
Yeah. That hurt my campaign more than anything. Yeah, that hurt my campaigns more than anything, was the Democrats coming in and, like, people that had been in the establishment a long time using the establishment playbook for an insurgent candidate. Yeah. You got to play the game different when you're an insurgent candidate. Absolutely. So I had someone like Rick Trevino that only raised $40,000, but put it all in the ground game, and he almost beat Gina Ortiz-Jones.
Well, it's like Donna won her primary entirely on the ground game. They visited everybody in Bell County. Do you know how big Bell County, Texas is?
Mm-hmm. I do, actually.
They visited everybody in Bell County, and they won the primary, and they won Bell County in the primary, and they lost Bell County in the general. And the reason they lost Bell County in the general is because they couldn't visit everybody in Bell County again because of COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah, COVID really hurt the 2020 election.
COVID hurt a lot of 2020 elections for sure. But anyway, I gotta wrap it up.
Have a great night.
Zeta, it's been a pleasure. I do want to come back and talk about the Marianne campaign more in depth. Let's give it a few weeks.
Yes.
See what happens. See if we'll have more to talk about, more interesting, exciting stuff to talk about 3 or 4 weeks down the road. But it has been an absolute pleasure to join you tonight, Chris. Something I've wanted to do for a long time.
I'm really
sorry
glad
I was so fiery.
No.
I apologize. I was a little passionate today reading all
that. We appreciate that.
We need that. There's a lot of shit out there to be pissed about.
Yes.
So
and
all right.
I want to thank you both for making it. I would definitely want to thank the guests. You have a great night, Jason.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Zeynab. Good to talk to you. Audience, take care. Find me on Twitter. That's the only place I am, at Call for Congress.
And Zeynab, do you have any final?
Not really. I agree with you and Jason that, I believe in primary challenges too. I don't think that we should completely give up on trying to primary in the primaries either. Like, that's part of the electoral process. And I know people are going to hate me for it, some people, but
I'll tell you where I see the future.
Primary is fine with me.
I see the future being in something like what Kenneth Mejia did in Los Angeles to win the city controller's job, where you take someone who has already a good record built up as someone who's genuinely what they say they are, and you run them against both the Democrats and the Republicans as an independent, not necessarily associated with any party. This works very well at the local level, especially if you have lots of volunteers, which on the local level, lots of volunteers saves on campaign expenses because, except for the mayor, most of these and some of the city council spots, most of these LA jobs are not advertised on TV. They're not doing commercials usually for the city controller. I know. I used to get LA television back in the day when I was a kid. They would do mayor's commercials left and right. But they didn't do the city controller on TV. So that's something where if everything goes into your ground game, that's what matters. If it's all going into signs and bumper stickers, that's what matters. And I think that that's really the future. If you're electing city controllers and city councilmen and people on school boards and county judges and county sheriffs, well, now you've got candidates to run for state office and Congress.
That, and, let's say that you were in a state, you were to get 10 people into the state house.
Mm-hmm.
Say you were to get 10 people into the state Senate, potentially, who are independent. Now you've just thrown a wrench in it because you've got 10 people that are outside of both parties in there to raise hell. And I think that that's a possibility. 60% to 70% of people polled identify independent now and have lost faith in both parties. So, and for some seats, it's harder to get ballot access when you're independent. For some, it's a lot easier. It all depends on the state, the Secretary of State rules. Every state's different.
If you combine people who are registered independent with what are called traditional non-voters, you get a number much bigger than either the Democrats or the Republicans.
Oh, yeah. And that's the thing is, people say that people need to be swayed on healthcare. They need to be swayed on the wars. They need to be swayed on. We agree. The minority, this little theocratic, saber rattling, really loud neo-Nazi bunch, they are the wealthy elite and they're a small number. Yeah. A loud number, a dangerous number, but a small number.
Well, these
neoliberals come from the same class. These are all from upper middle class suburbia, all these different factions. So the neoliberals, the blue no matter who people that are like, never run independent. It's got to be Democrat that are Dem diehards. Small fraction of even the Democrats, people that are registered Democrats.
Well, these centrists, the people who say, I'm a social liberal and a fiscal conservative, these are 8% of the voting population. 8% of the voting population are these sort of Joe Biden conservatives who call themselves centrists. I mean, it's not just that they're smaller than the people who identify as the progressive left. They're also smaller than the far right, which should worry people. And so when this group of 8% tells us we're the moderate middle, who are they snowing?
And you know what? Most Americans, they don't even have a label for themselves. That's why they check independent, because they don't know what any of it. It's not that they are not smart enough to know what it means. It's just they're too busy working. They're too busy doing a million other things to place a label on themselves. So they're just like, I'm independent. And the one thing that they do know, one of the most universal things across this country is that people don't trust the Democrats or the Republicans. They don't trust either party. They have no confidence in our government. So I think that there's opportunities for insurgent campaigns, and there is opportunities for electoralism. Oh, and I hate to say that because I want to be done with it. I'm exhausted by it. But that's the laws that are being passed are impacting us now.
Yes.
People are going to be furious about it when it reaches their homes, and it will very soon. Because I'm sorry, but a lot of people listening may not know. In Tennessee, they don't support the anti-trans bill. In Kentucky, they don't support the anti-trans bill. In Kentucky, they don't support the anti-abortion laws. In Tennessee, they don't support the anti-abortion laws. In West Virginia, the people do not support the anti-abortion laws. Our officials who are sitting in office right now are voting against what the population wants.
In West Virginia, progressive Democrats voted for that stupid trans ban.
Oh, I know.
And it's like, why are you doing that? It doesn't make sense to me.
Well, in Kentucky, they didn't. They were on the floor raising hell. But,
I'm thinking of one person in specifically because both a mutual friend and one of my friends who's a mutual friend with our mutual friend all both supported this person for their seat and were very upset by the vote, and I can't blame them.
Yeah, in West Virginia, absolutely. Yeah, I was talking to them about that the other night. We were just having a conversation about it. So, there's, yeah, I don't know. I'll let you go in just a minute, but I think that West Virginia, the Democratic Party has like a stronghold there. So even though it's forgotten in a lot of states, they have a stronghold and they work directly hand in hand with the Republicans. Yeah. But somewhere like Kentucky, it's more that the National has just completely abandoned the state.
Yes.
And so there's different dynamics everywhere.
Well, the state party in West Virginia basically does what Joe Manchin says, which meant, if I'm to believe what I am told, this means supporting the Republican in 2020 for the pretty much, which is gross. But that also makes Manchin more powerful if his colleague is a Republican and not a Democrat.
Right.
I don't think these right-wing Democrats in these southern states are stupid. I think they're malicious and misguided, but I don't think they're stupid. I think they're very cunning and manipulative.
It's true. And you see something different, like in Kentucky, they're supporting universal health care.
Yeah.
The Democrats support universal health care.
People who were against Medicare for all in 2020 are for it now in Kentucky.
Kentucky Kentucky's favored Medicare for all for a very long time.
Yeah. So. No, but I mean specific people in the Democratic Party who were against it in 2020 are for it now.
Yeah.
In Kentucky.
Yeah, they've recognized that it's highly popular here. And, Brashear has said that he would like to see universal health care in the state. But it hasn't, we haven't been able to get anything past the state house right now, but they've been trying to propose it. So, at least there's that much. I'm not defending Democrats, y'all, but you have to be pragmatic and actually look. I judge people based on what they do.
Yeah.
If they pass a law, if Kentucky Democrats turn around and they pass universal health care, I'm going to be suspicious. I'm going to read the policy, but I'm going to be glad they passed it.
Yeah. With all my problems, I have lots and lots of problems with Obamacare, but it's objectively a good thing that people in states that expanded Medicaid got health care who wouldn't have otherwise gotten health care.
Mm-hmm.
And in Oregon, where Medicaid is really good, I had better insurance on Medicaid than I did when I didn't qualify, when I made too much money to qualify for Medicaid. It's just a fact.
That makes a lot of sense. So, I think that we can have our values and our principles and we don't have to compromise those. But I think there's pragmatism too. And that's one thing that the right wing has.
But the problem is
sometimes folks on the left don't have the pragmatism or the drive, and we don't spend as much time. We'll drop things and we'll move from one thing to the next, to the next, and next. For the right wing to get here, they started 30 years ago when they started chipping away at the Supreme Court.
The problem is that the centrists have devalued pragmatism by claiming they're the pragmatic ones.
But they're not.
Of course they're not. Of course they're not. But when the centrists say we're the pragmatic ones, then pragmatism can rapidly get a very bad rap in just progressive circles, let alone actual leftists.
Well, let's just take the label off of it. Let's not use the word pragmatism. Let's just say, look at it and see, is this thing going to actually help me or is it going to hurt me? And start from there. Is it going to help us or is it going to hurt us collectively?
And this is the way we should look at it. Yes.
Like, you can have your principles and stuff. You can be suspicious of the Democratic Party. I'm not sheep herding people into freaking Democratic Party, so don't freak out because I'm not. But you can look at, and I'm not saying to compartmentalize, look at the whole picture too, because we do have to break the whole system. But that's, in the meantime, people are actually being hurt now. So what are the things we can do? Mutual aid. Yes. We can also do co-ops. We can do collective bargaining. We can do protest. Damn rallies and rallies don't work. Go protest. Go sit in their offices. Sit in the State House. Do a sit-in for 2 days in the State House.
One of the best things we could do, despite the fact that Ben Burgess wrote a piece in Jacobin saying we shouldn't do it, but one of the best things we can do is boycott companies who spend money on the cops or who contribute to anti-abortion garbage. Nobody who has a neighborhood pharmacy or a supermarket pharmacy should be shopping at Walgreens. I mean, this is the sort of thing that's easy, except we're told boycotts are something we're not supposed to do. Ben Burgess made the ridiculous argument that boycotts are libertarian because Milton Friedman once wrote a book in which he argued for boycotts. Imagine if Milton Friedman, when writing that book, had taken the position, well, Martin Luther King was a socialist and he was for boycotts. Therefore, boycotts are socialist. Then Milton Friedman would have never written that book that Ben Burgess is using to argue that boycotts are libertarian.
True. And if we do boycotts, like, we have to be targeted and we have to state demands, but general boycotts work. Like, I would shop at IGA and EC Porter because they're co-ops, even though they were a little bit more expensive. And I would shop at like I go to Aldi's often because they pay better and they have a union. So like, I will go and support places that I know that are better than, and I support local. Like, I went to a hair salon to get my daughter's hair done and I went locally. Now we're poor, but even if you're poor, you can do that. So
my family used to shop at Lucky in Southern California before Lucky went out of business, because Lucky was the only unionized supermarket left. All the others had broken the union.
But also, I'm not shaming people that have to go where they have to go to put food on their table or eat, or people that live in rural areas and one of the only places they can order from is Amazon because they can't afford gas to drive 4 hours to get something.
I finally decided, despite my desire really to do so, it's too hard to boycott Nestle. They own too much. There are things that are Nestle that aren't branded Nestle. You have to really look at the packaging to see the Nestle logo. They own things that used to not be Nestle that are now. Stouffer's is Nestle now. So you can't buy a Stouffer's lasagna or a Stouffer's pizza without giving Nestle money.
Well, that's another thing, we so want to sell people and we want to use the word socialism and sell people on it, or we want to use the word communism. If they're not there, we can start with, let's bust up the corporate monopolies, because 90% of Americans are there. Like 90% of people in the United States already want to bust up the monopolies. So that's one thing that we can agree on, that we can start and that we can do now, because it is going to take, I'm not a communist. I'm just going to say it. I'm not. I believe in mixed economies. I'm not a flat out communist. I don't believe in dogma, but I believe that there's a lot of lessons I've learned from reading the Communist Manifesto. I believe there's a lot of lessons I've learned from reading a lot of different types of political, ideologies and concepts and philosophies.
Sure.
But I'm not a straight up communist. I don't know what I am. I'm whatever the hell is going to work the best for us is what I am. And I know that capitalism right now is hurting us in the form that it's at, and it's fucked up and it's wrong. So one thing that I can talk to people about is these monopolies are wrong, these corporations are wrong, and it's going to scare small business owners that are just basically contractors that work for themselves, that have no employees, or maybe they have a partnership with one person, if we start talking about how we're going to take away their business. So I think that there's a way that we have to be able to talk to people that are poor and have class solidarity and understand what that means without alienating people. And but I mean, that's where the majority of people are.
So the simple,
how do you get them mobilized is the question.
Problem is, how do you have solidarity between the poor and a small business class that is one of the fundamental drivers of criminalizing homelessness?
What do you mean?
So the demands for criminalizing homelessness in downtown areas and cities frequently come from the small business owners.
Well, I mean, that's something that needs to be addressed.
But I mean,
small business owners in a city, I'm talking about impoverished people that own their own, whatever. There are plenty of people that I know that are poor. My mom's an artist. She owns her own business doing artwork.
Sure.
She's not a bad person.
No, I got
you. She's not a boss. She's not like a capitalist. She's poor as dirt.
Well, but that's a completely different thing too. When you say small business, nobody's talking about that when they use that phrase.
Some people are. I've heard people say if you're not an essential worker, you're not a worker. So and then there's a list of 30 jobs. And if you do anything outside of those jobs, you're not a true worker. I think when we start doing shit like that.
Well, but that's the whole thing. The only essential workers are the people who are those of us, regardless of how essential we are or not. The only essential workers are the people who were forced to work through the pandemic, regardless. Nobody should be using the term essential worker in any other sense. And that's not,
or some people say that the proletariat, and then they'll define and they'll say nurses aren't workers, teachers aren't workers.
That's just false. Because
people that do coding aren't workers, or, crazy. When we're doing that, we're just compartmentalizing ourselves to a point where.
So it's important to understand that Joe the plumber wasn't a worker. Joe the plumber was a business owner. And Joe the plumber's interests were as a business owner who employed other plumbers, not as a working plumber. And the Republicans made a great deal about Joe the plumber's working class status, ignoring the fact that he was a dude who employed other plumbers and not a working plumber.
Well, that's a small business owner with employees.
Yes.
Right now, a big bulk of the only labor that millennials can get are contract work.
Oh, I know.
So they'll get a 1099. They're considered a small business. It's the only work they can get. They can't get hired somewhere.
Yes, but let's be totally honest about that. Calling that a small business is conceding the lie to the people who have marginalized them by saying, oh, they don't work for us, they're a small business.
Yeah.
And so you admitting that saying that those people are really small business people is just fostering this oppression.
I agree, but that's one of the misconceptions. So those are just some things that we have to think about. What the left calls normies. How do normies define things? And are we using terminology that's academic?
So
are we using terminology that everyone's going to understand?
Normies mean, as an example of what you're talking about, normies means something completely different to me than what you're talking about. Normies is a reference to various sexual counterculture groups versus everybody else. Very specifically. Generally related to the things people didn't want at Pride.
That's interesting.
So that's how I process normies. I suppose there are people who say normies and mean people in different political circles, but I haven't really thought about it like that.
That's interesting. See? There's so much differentiation in terminology. That's what's hard to. So, like, when I talk about things, I'm like, okay, so anyone that, I differentiate a lot between like certain homeowners and people that don't own their homes.
Sure.
So that's a differentiate because there's generational poverty. But I do know that there's some homeowners that don't come from generational wealth.
There are some owners.
That's a lot few and far between.
There are homeowners who are stuck in debt traps.
Mm-hmm.
And those debt traps were specifically constructed to ensnare them in many cases. The best example being how being able to get a mortgage and buy a home has been a vehicle to increase white wealth and decrease black wealth.
Well, yeah.
For a white family, a mortgage is usually a ticket up. For a black family, a mortgage is often a debt trap, deliberately constructed that way. And when
that's often the case, it's especially for black people. Yes, that's often the case for anyone who doesn't have generational wealth.
Yes. And
so
when
start out without generational wealth. So what's happened is from the boomer sort of era, we have people that have gotten inheritances. They have parents that have helped them with the down payments of their home. Whole generations that have this, that are perpetuating that when their parents, leave the home or they give their home to their kids to sell them, then their kids take those and they start businesses. They pay off their student loans and they buy a home. This is a large portion or a decent portion of the country, about 25% of the country. That 25% makes up almost all of these extreme right wing and this like the neoliberal centrist.
Yeah.
Almost all of them come from this group. The other 75% of the country are either newly owning homes and having a hard time with that or renting.
Yeah. Well, I'm renting. I'm never going to own a home. My wife is very hopeful that we will be able to buy a home. We almost made it the last time we tried. But
I mean, it's one of my dreams in our current situation we're in to have that for my daughter, because that's the way our system is set up. And I don't want her to live a life like I live. So I understand why people feel that way.
I totally get that. People want their kids to be better off than them.
But we also have to distinguish the fact that there are people, and that's one of the things that I found in left leadership circles are a lot of the people that I've found that are in the leadership roles are from that generational wealth because they've had the time and they've had the ability to do this work. So that's one of the reasons we don't see a lot get done. And that's one of the reasons that we see so much misconceptions. And that's also why no one wants to talk about generational poverty.
And there are places where, and I get it. I understand that it's a rich neighborhood and someone has to do what they have to do to get elected. But no, the people in Long Island who own houses worth millions of dollars can sell their houses and move somewhere else if they really don't want to pay property taxes.
They do it all the time. They move to Kentucky. They move to the rural. So one of the things that happens is that in Kentucky, people will move from up north. They'll sell their homes for a couple million, and then they'll move to Kentucky in order to retire. And then they buy up all of our homes that are affordable for us because they usually buy like slightly smaller homes to retire in. And so, and they also buy up all of our like lake property and anything nice.
New York.
So they sell their homes and then because our cost of living is lower, they have this bucket of savings and then we're their workers until we die.
Yeah. New York did this to Florida. California did this to parts of Oregon.
Mm-hmm. And Colorado.
And parts of Washington.
Like Colorado as well. Colorado is a big one where a bunch of wealthy people have moved in and just kind of.
I believe that. Wyoming is the highest concentration of wealth in the country, believe it or not.
Tennessee.
Tennessee's up
So,
there.
and right now, Florida got expensive. So now people are centralizing in Tennessee, Georgia, Kentucky, North Carolina, and South Carolina. But they're selling their homes in places like California, in places like up there.
Well, now people are selling
because the cost of living is so different. The value up there, if they wanted to buy a retirement home up there, they would have to use most of that money.
Yep.
But here they can sell and they can take our
future.
Basically, it feels like. And I don't blame them in some ways, but they've also had generational wealth that got them to be able to buy that home.
People in Oregon are now, selling their houses and moving other places. So it's a cycle.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, a friend of mine, though it's gross, I don't want to talk bad about her because she should be the congressman in George Santos's district, dang it. But at the same time, she was saying, well, we can't reinstate all the taxes that Trump cut. And the reason she was saying that was because of her district in Long Island. And that was the only reason she was saying that, because that's her district and she has to say that to win in that district. And so they make X, Y, or Z argument why people with millions of dollars in assets are really middle class.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because they want to stay in that neighborhood. They don't want to move someplace else. And so they have become middle class by not selling out, in a sense. But at the same time, they still have all this property that they're choosing not to use to live the lifestyle that they want to live, and they're complaining about the taxes they chose to stay and pay. And so there's all these contradictions involved.
It makes a lot of sense. But I always say, let's not focus on the 25%.
No.
I'm not saying to abandon them or to not care, because they are human beings. I'm not trying to dehumanize anyone, but I think we should focus on organizing the 75% that are hurting, because it is. I mean, median incomes. You guys need to all look up median incomes right now. After the last census, they've gone down in almost every state. In Kentucky, they used to almost be $50,000. Now it's $27,000 is the median income.
I've never made the national median. So
what is it right now? Let's see, national median. And then I will probably let you go and go to bed. Let's see. Yep, I've never made the national median. It's $70,824.
That's actually gone up some, the national median. Last time it was still around 50 or 60 that I remember looking it up. So that's actually gone up.
Let's see, median income Kentucky, I'll tell you.
That's going to be lower.
It is right now $27,503.
So national median, 75,000. Kentucky median, 27,000. That's a big difference. This is what I was saying again about, it's just weird that it's all these pro-union parts of the South that are so poor.
Oh, yeah.
And it started after the Redeemers took these states back.
West Virginia is $26,187. Only $39,550 for a household.
Yeah. And fun fact, Woodrow Wilson, who dropped bombs on the West Virginia and Kentucky coal miners during the coal wars, was from Confederate Virginia and was a lost cause guy.
That's crazy.
And he helped make West Virginia poor, and Kentucky for that matter.
Oh, Jesus. Mississippi's $25,000.
So, dirty secret. There are more white people in Mississippi on welfare than there are Black people on welfare in like a combination of three major cities where the stereotype is every Black person is on welfare. So it's like Mississippi would not exist without welfare. And yet representatives from Mississippi vote to get rid of it. Oh, Jackson, Mississippi is the one they're trying to wipe out right now, basically. And I don't think that's too strong. Wipe out is a good way to put it. They're trying to take over the city from outside in exactly the same way as was done to Flint, Michigan. And they claim it's for this city's good, despite this sort of thing not really working out very well anywhere. And it's basically their belief that Black people can't and shouldn't govern themselves, which is just wrong.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. You know, there's Black people shouldn't govern themselves, which has been the trope forever.
Mm-hmm.
There's indigenous people shouldn't govern themselves, and then
Yep.
there's poor people shouldn't
Mm-hmm.
govern themselves.
And plenty of
That's
progressive
what I mean, because
people believe
they've
that.
been saying that about Appalachians for how long?
Yeah, I know.
And so it's this idea that, you know, it's either your, you know, your race, because racism definitely has to, and I think it's because, and you know this, it just comes down to there has to be a class to do the work. There has to be worker bees. And I really think that upper middle class people, and I've heard them say it before, you catch people because people will say, you know, I used to work a desk at a real estate office, and people would come in and they would say things like, you know, will you check the demographics of that neighborhood?
Mm-hmm.
I want to make sure that I'm moving into a good neighborhood.
Yes.
And then I would give them like a whole bunch of non-racist demographics, and they'd be like, well, how many Black people live there? They would just come around and ask. That happened so often, and it was always like a soccer mom or a wine mom, you know, or even crunchy moms, believe it or not, were like that.
Well, so there are all sorts of these tropes that are associated with liberals that are really right-wing. One of the biggest, and it's a shame because there are leftists who really believe they have to be vegan to be good leftists. But while there are lots of good health reasons to be a vegan, if you can do it,
if you can afford it too,
if you can afford it. At the same time, veganism is specifically associated historically with purity religions and prejudice based on cultural purity. One of the common ways that high caste Indians discriminate against all the other Indians who aren't of their caste is to force cafeterias to only serve vegan food. Because vegan food is a very big thing for the Brahmin caste.
Mm-hmm.
And making everyone live up to the Brahmin caste standards is an act of prejudice.
Well, that, and also, you know, I have to have meat because I have a rare blood disorder called thalassemia. And if I don't have certain proteins that comes from meat, because I went vegetarian, you know, and then I went vegan, and I became pregnant. And while I was pregnant, I got to go to a doctor. It was kind of crazy. So I had Medicare for a little while. But the doctors told me, they were like, you have to eat meat. Like,
porphyria.
You're not going to sustain.
That's another one.
You're going to have to eat meat after because you have a blood disorder that requires you to have specific proteins that are only found in meat. So I have to eat meat. I crave it sometimes. It's bad. But
people who have another condition. I don't know if this is related to yours or not, but there's a set of conditions that used to be called porphyria as a group. And you pretty much have to have animal protein, specifically from red meat.
Mm-hmm. I know that like thalassemia is one of the places where the myth of like vampires and stuff came from, because we would eat our meat like rare to mid-rare.
Fun fact is that vampires came from the heavy taxes that nobles imposed on poor people in Eastern and Central Europe. And at the same time, the nobles were likely to have porphyria because of inbreeding. And one of the symptoms of porphyria is dementia that simulates certain mental illnesses. The most famous historical example is the madness of King George. The Hanovers had porphyria, hereditary, because of their marrying of one another's cousins for so long. The Hohenzollerns of Prussia, who were related to the Hanovers, also had a porphyria problem.
Really?
Yes.
I'm looking at porphyria tonight after we get off this call. Jenna just made a comment that I want to show here. She says, I lived in Western Washington most of my adult life. I lived in a bunch of red states, Realness and Kitsap. Colorado and Washington are some of the most yikes right-wing I've ever seen.
Yes. Yes, it's true. And at the same time, Colorado is also the liberal state that's legalized pot first. And so you've got to reconcile this stuff, and it's more contradictions.
It's class analysis, because just like I was saying, a lot of these people who are racist, who go and secretly vote for Trump and go and they secretly donate to Republicans, will at the same time say that they're Democrats. Yeah. They'll go online, they'll have these personalities like they're the most liberal people, and then you get to know them and you're like, what? And there's one of the differences is, because Thomas and I were talking about this last night, is that poor people have to work with other poor people.
Yes.
So in a lot of these rural areas, you have people that, I mean, there are racists. Don't get me wrong. There's racist in Kentucky for sure. But it's just like my friend Sabrina was saying, you know, she hung out with libertarians in Kentucky. She hung out with, like, you know, all kinds of people.
Sure.
Wasn't that bad. She goes up to Buffalo. Her whole community almost, like, around her is racist.
Yeah.
So it was a very different experience going from Kentucky to up there. She was like, what the hell is this? And the libertarians were like crazy racist up there, and they're not down here. So one of the things that I think it has to do with is that class divide. And actually, a lot of poor people think if they're truck drivers, if they're working at restaurants, if they're working at gas stations, if they're, you know, working, whatever it might be, you're working with a lot of times people from all kinds of different backgrounds and races.
Yeah.
And so you're exposed to it. And a lot of people that are more kind of conservative bent kind of have this mentality, especially like the more people that are from more rural areas, maybe poorer conservatives, when it impacts them, or if it's somebody they know, all of a sudden it changes, right? So, you know, there'll be subtle racism, there'll be microaggressions that are part of our culture and society, but I'm talking about overt Nazism, racism, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
They're more likely to stand up, somebody who's rural and poor, to stand up for the Black community than they are to this. A lot of where this is coming from, a lot of, like you said, the policing of the neighborhoods, the wanting to arrest homeless people, the building cop cities and shit like that. That's coming from wealthy people that want to protect their neighborhoods and keep their neighborhoods.
It's a combination. So it's like cops. So cops get their money from PBAs. Now they get federal money and they get huge pieces of local budgets, but that's not all their money. Cops get a whole lot of money through what's called PBAs, Patrolmen's Benevolent Associations, Police Benevolent Associations, that sort of thing. These are the groups that call you up and ask you to donate money to the cops. Have you ever gotten that phone call?
Oh yeah, lots and lots. The Fraternal Order of Police, yes.
Yes, them too. That's the union.
Mm-hmm.
And the union does a lot of the same things too. But the PBAs are even more, because the PBAs were founded to give cops funerals if they got killed in the line of duty.
Right.
And they ended up doing things like buying cops tanks. As like corporate donations to PBAs are the biggest way Cop City is being funded. And
can I address Leon really quick?
Yes.
He says, I lived in rural New York State, and I can tell you this, my area, rural people are very racist. Yes.
Because it's class.
It's class, and it's more so in the North. I'm telling you. And it's in the coastal regions. I'm sorry to say that because there's a lot of coastal progressives, and I'm not trying to hurt anyone's feelings, but it is in a lot of rural areas.
Rural people from New York are likely to be more likely to be well-off property owners than rural people in Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
Their families have generational property.
And
Albany and Buffalo.
A lot of our racists are the upper middle class people in Kentucky.
Yes. Well, again, the people who were opposed, with a few exceptions, the people who were opposed to the KKK in the Reconstruction South were people who were affected by the things that affected their Black friends and coworkers in the new, less restrictive South. And, you know, it wasn't, there were a handful of people who tried to help because of various other loyalties that were related more to Union versus Confederacy and anti-slavery feeling. But there was a lot of class stuff going on during Reconstruction too. And there was the beginning of class unity. One of the executed Haymarket anarchists was a Confederate veteran who became an advocate for the rights of slaves after he married a Black woman in post-war Texas.
Really?
Yes. Albert and Lucy Parsons were two of the founders of the American anarchist movement. They were a Black woman and a Confederate veteran.
Interesting.
Albert Parsons was one of the Haymarket conspirators who was hanged. Lucy Parsons went on to edit and write and speak at anarchist meetings for many, many years, into her old age. Very important editor and writer and publisher in anarchist history in America.
Lucy Parsons.
Lucy Parsons.
I've not read anything from her. I'll have to look that up.
Yeah, she's worth studying.
That's fascinating. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. And now we really need to stop because this has gone on way too late even for me.
I have to go to bed and be up at 7:30 or 6:30 in the morning. Take the kids.
Everybody have a great night, folks. Thanks for hanging out with us. Thank you, Zeynab.
Thanks for chatting, Chris. Bye.
My pleasure. Bye. And I'll tweet at you, folks.